United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. This meeting is being live streamed by Chelmsford Telemedia and posted to the CPS website for interested community members to access and watch. Although we are not allowing for in-person public participation, interested community members were encouraged to submit their names and addresses to Superintendent Lang if they wanted to participate remotely under the public input portion of our meeting. During our public input session, anyone who has joined us through the GoToMeeting platform and expressed interest in making a comment will be recognized by the superintendent and allowed to speak with the committee. If anyone watching this meeting live has questions or comments to share, they're encouraged to email one of us during our meeting, and we'll read their questions or comments during our second public input session at the end of the meeting. So welcome to this meeting of the Chelmsford School Committee. I want to thank all of you that are either tuning in on Chelmsford Telemedia or logging in on the GoToMeeting platform. I also want to thank all the people who have emailed us over the last 2 weeks for sharing your thoughts about the plans for reopening schools in the fall. Tonight we will be doing two things. One, we'll be hearing about the three options for reopening schools in the fall: full in-person, hybrid, and remote, one more time, and improving those three plans for submission to the state. Secondly, we will be discussing and very likely selecting which of those three plans we would like to start the school year with. So before we begin, is there anyone that has any good news they want to share?
I just want to mention that Friday evening, the graduation, considering it was pulled together on Tuesday, the speeches were wonderful. Every one of the speeches, the student speeches, Craig Vitale as the faculty speaker and Steve Murray, they did a beautiful job. As a traditionalist, I spent most of my career at the high school, 35 years, chasing beach balls. When Aaron, at the end of his speech, hit the beach ball out into the pack, I laughed hysterically. It was the perfect moment, and he did it, it was beautiful. His speech was great, and it was just the right touch. But a special shout out to Tom Peterson, Dan Sylvian, and Craig Robinson and their crew for getting it all together. I know they were up late, getting up early in the morning, and as always, they did a wonderful job. And Saturday, I went down when they were giving out the diplomas and yearbook, and that worked well. The faculty volunteers there, and considering the situation, I think it was handled extremely well.
All right, any other good news?
I need to add to my good news from last time, which was the masks, that the greater good news is that it was not only Harrington PTO that led, but it was in cooperation with Parker. And so I want to thank all the folks from Parker as well and congratulate them.
All right, anybody else have anything? Okay. All right, so we're now on to our first public input part of our meeting. As mentioned a few minutes ago, anyone who wanted to participate in tonight's public comment needed to email Superintendent Lang and then log into GoToMeeting. For those that are speaking tonight, I would ask you to try to limit your comments to 3 minutes so everyone has an opportunity to speak. Also remember that this comment period is for items listed on tonight's agenda. Although we will not be responding directly to your comments during this part of the meeting, we'll try to address them when we get to that item in the agenda. So at this point, I'll turn it over to the Superintendent.
Thank you. We actually I hope everyone is doing well tonight. We had three individuals who reached out to me and requested to speak. So in no specific order, I'm just going to ask the three individuals who emailed me. The first one is resident Allie Barnes. I'm going to unmute Allie. If you are on line, I can see you there. You may have to unmute your own microphone at this point. And just ask you to state your name and your address, and you're live at the school committee meeting to make a statement.
Great, thank you, Jay. Yeah, my name's Allison Barnes. I'm a resident at 104 Garrison Road, and thank you for inviting the public to continue speaking during these sessions. First, I'd like to say thank you for taking on this task. I know you've all been working hard, and you've kind of been set up to be making decisions about social services and supporting the community in ways that go above and beyond what is required for providing education. Not only are you taking the time to consider a robust and full education experience for our children, but attempting to meet the additional needs, like making sure that families are able to go to work, ensuring their jobs and health insurance, and that's commendable, so thank you. I'd also like to thank you for wearing your mask during the public meetings. It serves as an example to families and students in the event that we are going back into the buildings, that staff will be following CDC recommendations. I hope that's continuing off cameras as well. And then the main concern that I'd like you to consider when making decisions about in-person services is that the community has a right to transparency in our government. And I'm speaking specifically about in the event that there are staff or students in the building, I recommend that the information on the number of positive cases and number of classrooms that have to be closed because of positive cases be published publicly and be easily accessed. People have the right to know their calculated risk they're taking by coming to work or sending their children to school. Additionally, in the same vein, neither students nor staff should be penalized for discussing health and safety concerns, whether that be in person, on social media, or sharing photos or documents. Of course, that wouldn't override any current policies protecting student confidentiality. So I just wanted to raise those 2 points about in-person learning and making sure that our communities are protected and have the information they need. So thank you for taking time to consider my concerns.
Great. Thank
Thank
you
you,
very
Ally.
much, Ally. Our second speaker this evening is Jamie Brown. So give me one moment, Jamie. I'm going to unmute you. Whoops. Can you try to unmute yourself? There you go. Jamie, you're live at the school committee meeting. If you could just state your name and address for the record, and then the floor is yours.
Yes, my name's Jamie Brown. I live at 118 Graniteville Road here in Chelmsford. Good evening, everyone. First, I just want to again say thank you for all your effort in handling this tremendous task, and I appreciate the diligence that you all are putting forth. I'd like to present some items that I hope you will put into your considerations and discussions when it comes to deciding what the learning model that you choose for Chelmsford and what it will look like for our children. There have been some discussions about it being safe for our children to return to school. Until a viable vaccine is developed, the threat of this virus will always be here. So I ask, when do you think it will be considered safe? Can we honestly expect our kids to effectively develop and learn strictly through remote learning until a vaccine is developed? The point of asymptomatic person was brought up. However, won't an asymptomatic person always be unknown until they are tested? Will there be a plan in place to have all staff and or students tested prior to school starting and or on a regular basis? In reference to cohort assignments, will there be considerations made for cohort assignments based on parent requests for children to be assigned to same cohorts for which parents are helping each other with childcare, transportation, or remote learning? For example, if cohorts are split based on last names alphabetically, my children would be in group A, but my neighbor's kids are going to be in group B. I'd be able to help my neighbor with childcare and transportation if their kids were in the same cohort as mine. Would the district place their children in the same group as mine based on that request and need? There have been comments made about considerations of staff's childcare needs, and I would hope that parents could also receive that same consideration. In regard to teachers instructing class and students attending remotely, what systems will be in place to allow children to actively participate or ask questions about material being taught while viewing remotely? Will there be an in-classroom aid to watch the technology platform so that when a student has a question or an answer to a question posed by a teacher, they can be called upon? In regard to student remote attendance and participation, has there been any considerations on remote attendance during school hours for those who have parents working remotely? What happens when parents are unable to monitor or ensure the children's participation, especially for elementary and middle school, during regular school hours because they have their own work obligations or can't afford an in-home child care provider or assistant? What about those who have to send children to child care facilities or a child care provider which cannot accommodate remote learning attendance or participation requirements? And are there any considerations or support for those who have multiple children who will need to be online simultaneously but don't have or can't afford the internet capabilities to handle such demand, or don't have internet at all? And what provisions will be made for those types of situations when it comes to student and attendance participation? And lastly, with all the assignments, that are required to be turned in, will they be given in paper form? Would there be a take-home package sent home weekly, including remote work? Last year, there were several items that needed printing for my child to effectively use, to learn with or from, and or turn in. Are there considerations for those who don't have printing capabilities or can't afford the demand expense, such as paper and ink? In closing, I'd like to say that we inevitably will have to face this risk. It is something that none of us have chosen, but it has become today's reality. However, I believe we can do it safely and effectively with positive support and due diligence. Through this, we can teach our kids how to adapt and overcome while just seeing how resilient they are. It's been said that school won't be like it was when the kids won't get the social aspect because of the new CDC guidelines. And at first I considered the same point. Even with town baseball and all the restrictions, I thought, this is not going to be good for my son, and this possibly couldn't work, and he wasn't going to enjoy it. However, I could not have been more wrong. My son has grown tremendously in skill and social development and mood during this extraordinary season. With no significant increase reported in COVID cases in town, and in fact, the Massachusetts Department of Health has reported an actual decrease in the percentage change of case counts for Chelmsford. I believe our kids can obtain the same benefit with this some level of in-person schooling. And with the unwavering support and expertise of our educational professionals that many of us need and rely on, our children's education can effectively progress forward. I know you all have a lot to decide on, and I hope that you'll be able to address these concerns as well as those posed by others. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our third speaker, there was a third speaker on the line, but they've disconnected at this point. So I don't know if you'd like me to leave it on for a few minutes while we proceed, or if you want to give an opportunity at the end of the meeting
You
to.
give it at the end.
At
maybe
the
just
end,
at the
okay.
Yeah, if they
It's
would
been a
like.
few minutes since they've disconnected,
Yeah,
so
okay.
we can come back to them at the end and try.
Yep, great.
Thank you, Jamie.
Okay, so now we're on to new business. What I think I mentioned this beginning, what I think would be best is if we could start with just a quick review, I guess, of the 3 plans that we're submitting to DESI, because I know that's one of our tasks, is we have to approve those plans to be submitted. It was supposed to be today, but I guess now it's been extended till Friday, but still would be best to do that now. So if we could just get again, another overview of the 3 different options that we're submitting, maybe add some details in terms of the schedules. That I know we put some mock schedules in there. And then if anybody has any questions or comments about those 3 plans, that would be time to ask them. And then if we vote on those 3 as what we're going to submit, then we can have the discussion of which of those 3 options we think is going to be best to start the year with. Okay, so.
Sure. So let me just give a brief recap. Even though the committee did vote to not look into the full hybrid model, we still need to have a plan prepared for the full in-person model. We still need to have a plan to submit for that. So we did vet out all of that information that you received last week that had the different components such as scheduling for students and all of the different tasks that were given to us from DESI. So a full in-person is just that, all students coming back to school. And what we would be doing is repurposing spaces such as libraries, our cafeterias, our different specialist rooms that are larger, performing arts centers, all of the above based on what the schools have. And with that situation, we found that we were limited in space because no one was comfortable with the 3 feet distance. So 3 feet was tight when they vetted out that whole process, let alone 6 feet. So that is why the committee took that off the plate. So there are schedules. We would follow our regular schedule. We would work with our staff to put them in different spots with students based on the spaces that are available, but that would be the full in-person piece. When it came to the hybrid piece, it's half the students coming to school. So you would have cohort A and B. A lot of people are looking into the alphabet because it makes sense, and then aligning any families that have siblings at the different levels. So you'd have to look vertically to make sure that everybody is in alignment going on the same days, so you're not splitting up families. And with that model, we had the options of, the cohort A and B. We could have gone half a day with one group, half a day with another. We could have gone every other week, and then we could do what's called the 2x2 model. Students come to school for 2 days in cohort A, then there's a break in the middle of the week, and then students come, the second cohort comes for the last 2 days. It looked that at that point, that when it came to the hybrid model, that the 2x2 was the choice for families, because with every other week, there was too much time in between to actually not see students. A lot could happen at that point. And then a half a day does not give us enough time to even cover our basic 4 classes, let alone all the specialists and the other classes that students take. So that was that group. And then remote is that's that. Every student online, full curriculum, as if we were a virtual school. So with the schedules, we did look at the different schedules, and we made sure that we aligned them, because even with a hybrid model, so if full remote is easy, full back to school is easy, we'd follow our regular schedules. However, with the remote, we have to, we were looking into considerations such as lunch, serving lunch. Also, students sitting in rows facing forward all day. That's not our typical way we teach our students. And then just how would that look like in the school? So we worked with the schedules to make sure that it's a modified early release time. So in other words, it's not just a half day, because we can't do that, but it's an extended time for half day. So students would be leaving school earlier than they normally would, but not at the half-day marker. And we aligned those 3 schedules together to make sure that students were in school for at least 4 hours a day. So those are our 3 plans.
Yeah, and just go off that for 1 second. I think the key to that particular model was trying to get at least 4 hours of real instruction. So it's cutting out some of the specials and things along those lines, but the kids are really coming in for their math blocks, the ELA blocks. We also, when we would be doing this, we'd be trying to cohort the students as much as possible. So we then tried to have the 4 hours kind of lead us to a natural break in the day, where we could dismiss the students and send them home, with lunch for them if they needed or wanted to be able to have lunch, and then rejoin their classmates all remotely in the afternoon for an afternoon activity. We wanted to try to avoid getting everyone together in the cafeteria for lunch and recess and all of those different activities. So that was the reason for the slightly truncated day, to get a good 4 hours of instruction in before we did the dismissal and moved the students on. But and Linda did a nice job of explaining everything else. I think the other thing that just wasn't mentioned in the morning and afternoon session, in addition to it just being very tight on time, trying to move all the different groups in, it also really doesn't provide any time for cleaning to take place between the AM and the PM group. The nice thing about the Wednesday being the off day is that your cohort's together Monday, Tuesday. You can have that deep cleaning on Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday, you have a different cohort. So it just provides more space. We then would have the weekend, obviously, to clean for the next group coming in. So that AM, PM, while it's nice to see the kids every day, it was just operationally, and then you throw transportation on top of that, very, very difficult, and nearly impossible to pull off. So that's why the 2x2, as we're calling it, was really the preferred hybrid model.
So when we submit it, are we submitting all 3 of those options, or are we just going to have the 2x2
Just the
in there?
2x2.
So we'll just, in that document, those other 2 won't be
Yeah,
part?
we were just demonstrating for you some of the work that the different working groups had done, because we had a lot of staff and parents who participate. Everything okay?
No, I'm
Oh.
just saying, when we submit to DESI, we'd have to submit all 3 of the plans.
No, but I'm just saying, when the
But-
hybrid, you had 3
The
We
one
would
hybrid.
only submit the one,
The
right,
2x2, that's
okay.
my question,
I just wanted to make sure we weren't,
Yeah.
I think I got confused on that.
Yeah,
No,
no.
it's just the one hybrid
Correct.
option.
So you have the AM, PM, and the 2x2.
Correct, I would
So
remove
just-
those.
To really show you just some of the
Yeah.
working group work that took place,
Okay.
because a lot of really time did go into that to kind of vet through all the different plans. So our recommendation is, if you did opt for the hybrid model, that'd be the 2x2 model. So ultimately, if you approve that, that would be the hybrid model that goes into the state. And if we found ourselves in a hybrid situation over the course of the year, that's the one we'd be looking to perfect and implement.
Anybody have questions about the models or the schedule, draft schedules, or anything?
So we're looking at 2 different motions, right? The first one we're looking at is for the submission to DESI, correct?
Of the 3
Of the
different
3
plans?
plans,
Yes.
correct. And then the second one would be which one it is that we're going to choose.
Which we'll do later in the meeting.
Right, so as far as the submission is concerned, I don't have any questions. It seems pretty straightforward, but I do have questions about each of the plans and would like to have some time to be able to address those.
I agree.
Maria?
I had the same thing as John. I have questions going forward after this motion.
Okay. Along with the plans, are any of those other reports being submitted to DESI, the facilities one or the special populations one.
Yep. It will all go together in one larger document, because we have to address all those pieces.
So anybody have any questions on those particular?
Are you coming back to those, or are you?
We can come back to anything, you know,
Yeah.
once we start talking about the different models, but
Oh.
I don't know if anybody had specific questions.
I don't have any questions with regards to the submission of the report. I do have questions about the report itself, though.
Me too.
So Jeff, question you for quizzical look.
So if we vote on to send these 3 in, we can still change.
Well, you're basically the first thing we're gonna do tonight is vote the 3 different plan options. So the in-person, the hybrid, and the remote. So we're gonna vote, Linda will then kind of finalize the packet that will have different pieces of those supporting reports pulled into it, and then that will go off to the state. Aside from that, you know, I have a little presentation for you, and then we're gonna have discussion about what each of those, you know, get a little bit deeper if you want to, into the 3 different programs. But we probably won't talk about the different hybrid options. So we'll just talk about if we implemented the hybrid, we're gonna talk about the 2x2. We're not gonna go talk about the AM, PM.
So if we make changes to the 2 and 2, we can still do that after we vote to submit it.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna need to still, even as a team, be kind of tweaking
Right.
how things look. It's really just to say that if we implemented the hybrid, we're doing the 2x2 and not the other 2 options. Because even, to be honest with you, even when we look at like times, we fooled around with schedules a little bit, because with some of those options, we've got to be able to provide all the different transportation options for kids. So we might have to move some of the start and end dates of schools around. And again, even after we pick these 3, we still have to go meet and negotiate with the union to pull together our plans. So there could be different little tweaks, but it's just really to say, if we do the hybrid, it's the 2x2. That's kind of the key at this point.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions on just the plans that we're planning to submit? Everybody's comfortable with the plans? No? Okay. All right, so,
I recommend the school committee submit the full return reopening plan, the hybrid model reopening plan, and the full remote model reopening plan as presented to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education.
that seem reasonable?
Second.
I think that's fine.
All right, so we have a motion second. Any further comments or questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so the plans are all set, so now we can start the discussion on, really, we decided last week that we're gonna take the full in-person off the table. So really what we'll be discussing are the remote plan and the hybrid plan. So, I don't know if you wanna start with your survey, since it's in the packet, that you had of the parents, and then we'll go
Sure.
from there.
Yeah, just a couple of documents to share with you. And, you know, again, for those watching, at this point in time, you know, a full return to school with everyone present is really just not feasible. So it's not that we won't eventually get back to a full in-person model of schooling, but it's just really not in consideration for the start of the school year. And that's something that we're gonna have to, obviously, just be in a different situation before we can really consider implementing. So the 2 plans that we're really going to discuss tonight, and one of the things I wanted to do was be able to get you some feedback from our community on, was their feeling toward the hybrid option. So that would be, again, that 2x2 option. How many people, if that were offered, would opt for the hybrid option? And then how many would, even if the hybrid option, because there's some confusion out there, even if the district votes to implement the hybrid option, families still have the choice to be able to have their child stay fully remote. So you could have 2 different kind of cohorts even within the hybrid option, a group that's, you know, in the AB, but then a group that just stays fully remote the whole time. So that would be a choice. Or then the second option would be, as a district, to just fully stay remote and only offer the full option for all of our students. So last week, I was due to provide the families with an update for the start of the school year. So I provided you with a copy of the communication that I had sent out to our families. It was a little lengthy, but I just wanted to be able to provide them with the different documents that some have been requesting. Department of Ed has put out different guidance documents on a number of different matters. So I wanted to get that all into one communication for our families. Let them know that the full in-person return to school was off the table at that point, because for planning purposes, regardless of if we do the hybrid or the remote, there's daycare implications, so we wanted parents to start thinking about that. And then also, our school calendar was going to start the week before Labor Day, as we've done the last couple of years. But on a state level, the Commissioner of Education and the state level unions agreed to basically up to 10 days of school at the beginning of the school year to be used for staff training before students are actually introduced to the mix. So that's something that we still have to negotiate with our unions, but I wanted to at least flag for families that under any scenario, we wouldn't be coming back before Labor Day, that the children will actually start after Labor Day at some point. You know, could be as close as after Labor Day, all the way almost until the middle of September, around the 16th would technically be that 10 days. So that is something that we're in discussions with the union on. As soon as we know what that date's going to be, we would update the school calendar and notify parents, but we wanted them to be able to at least make some plans as the school year approaches. So we sent that out. I tried to give them a little bit of an overview again of what the different plan options were going to be. And let me just pull that up real quickly for you. I have to say I was actually very impressed with the response rate we get. Oftentimes we put a survey out and you know, we get a decent response. But what we asked families to do in this particular survey was actually fill out a different survey for each child that they have in the district. Because you might feel differently towards an older student as opposed to a younger student. And we really wanted to try to capture exactly where everyone felt and give them that opportunity to tell us. When we take a look at the data that we received back, so I initially on Friday, we had about 3,500 responses. So I had initially in your packet put a presentation together based on that. What you'll find is that the overall percentages, because it's such a large number, basically held true. But I did at 3:30 this afternoon, close the survey officially, and I grabbed the data at that point in time, and we actually had over 4,000 responses. So we have about 5,000 students in the district. So that is incredibly good data and valid data for us to be making our decisions on. And you can see this first chart basically just shows which school the student is represented of for this coming school year. So we have a good representation of students really from the elementary, the middle, and the high school level here in this data. So I was very pleased to see that. The next thing I wanted to look at was at the elementary, the middle, and the high school level, just to make sure that we had a good representation from each grade levels. And say at the elementary school, we weren't seeing data for just the 4th grade or you know, one of the other particular grades. But really, when you look across all 3 grade levels, we had a very good distribution. You know, right around 20%, which you'd expect to see for grades K through 4 at the elementary level. At the middle school level, again, 4 grade levels, you know, they're right around 25%. You really couldn't get much better than that. And then similarly at the high school as well, we actually have, you know, almost about a quarter being representative of different groups. So we have a very good distribution of students in the district with regard to that level of data. So then the first question we asked parents was, if the school committee approves and then works with the school union to agree to begin the school year under the hybrid model, what would they do for their 4,000 students? So we had about 65% of the students say that they would like to opt for the hybrid option, which would have some in-person learning and then some remote learning. We had about 33% say that they would actually opt for the full remote option, which would be fine. That would be available to them, and that would be something that we would have to schedule, obviously, with our staff. And we had about 2.3% of the population indicate that really the hybrid or the remote wasn't going to work for them, that they would opt to try to find another program outside of the Chelmsford schools, whether it be a private school, a parochial school. There's been a lot of talk about homeschool, things along those lines. So these are, you know, I think strong data points. They do show, obviously, that about 2/3 of our families would welcome and appreciate the choice to have some in-person learning, while 1/3 of our families basically would like and opt for the full remote option at that point. Those numbers, again, in ballparks, rang true between Friday and today. They vary just a little bit. But again, to get 4,000 responses, I think is pretty significant. I then just took a look at, of the students who would opt for remote at that point. I was able to just kind of pull that data this afternoon after we closed the survey, just to get a sense for where those students were coming from, just to see if we could see any kind of data trends. And it is certainly heavier on the elementary end, where students would be opting for the full remote as opposed to coming back in any kind of in-person schooling. So you do have that data there. And then I wanted to get a sense to be able to compare to the second question about students who our program just isn't going to meet their needs. How many would, opt out, and at what particular grade levels they would leave the district. So that 92 students there is representative of that 2.3% that are saying that the remote or the hybrid option really doesn't work for them. It leads me to speculate that this particular group is really looking for a full in-person return to school. And that unfortunately is just an option that we don't have for them right now. So I don't know if, again, they might elect for homeschooling, if they might end up, this was a non-binding survey, so they might still say they want to go remote, or they want to try the hybrid. It would be better than nothing. But I thought that data was interesting as well. And then the second question, we tried to keep it a very quick survey. The second question on the survey basically just asked, if you only had a full remote option available to you and the committee did not vote for the hybrid option, what would you do? And here about 92% of the students indicated that they would stay with us remotely. But what you saw was the number actually jumped from 2.3% up to over 8% of families said at that point, really, it doesn't work for us just being fully remote. Again, leading me to speculate that they need some type of in-person learning, whether it's, half-time or full-time. So that was a significant number in itself. And then I broke down that 333 respondents based on grade levels to, again, just kind of see where that data lie. And then I was not overly surprised that we do have again, significant number at the elementary level, but particularly that's where you're seeing the kindergarten students. And I quite honestly can't blame them. If I were a parent of a kindergarten student and this was going to be their first experience in school, and I had the wherewithal to maybe keep them home for another year or look at some kind of private option, I might avail myself to that. So you did see the biggest number actually is K. And then basically the numbers are sprinkled through the rest of the grade levels, but that comprises the 333 students. So I thought, again, I thought that was very good data. I know, as Dennis mentioned earlier, we've all been receiving emails with people on both sides of the fence over the course of the last number of days. And that's really something we need to talk about tonight. Obviously, there's been a lot of questions that have come up in the emails, both pros and cons to both. As I indicated when we met last meeting, and for what it's worth, my recommendation is I do see a significant value in at least having some in-person schooling or learning to take place at the beginning of the school year. I would support and recommend the hybrid option for consideration. I just, in speaking with my staff and also just educators and teachers, there's a significant amount of value in early on getting to make those connections, getting to make those relationships with students, to be able to see them and assess where they're at. I think we all realize that this is going to be a very fluid school year. Whether we start fully remote or we start hybrid, it's likely we're going to be switching back and forth over the course of the school year. And I think for this committee and also in our discussions with the union, we really should be talking about what those metrics would be. What would be times when we consider in-person schooling? What would be a metric that might say we should go remote for a period of time? Because again, I do think that that's probably likely at some point this fall or winter, depending on what happens with data trends. But at the same time, I think we are in a very good position with regard to transmission rates and testing rates to be able to go back to school in a very safe and limited capacity, which this data actually affords us. When again, just as an example of the hybrid, when I took a look at the numbers, if you look at one of our elementary classrooms, for instance, that might have, I'm just going to use round numbers, so let's say it has 24 kids because it's easy to divide. If we have a third of those students who want to opt fully for remote, you're basically taking 8 students out of the equation. That would leave us 16 students that we'd be dividing into cohort A and B. So a teacher and a para in a classroom would basically have 8 students with them for that 4 hours a day, twice a week, to really get to know them and to lay some of the foundation for the work that'll happen over the school year. Those are incredible numbers. If you could have a teacher at the elementary grade level with 8 students in front of them, have a para, who could be helping the teacher even facilitate some of the online learning. So if you have the 8 of the 16 kids, depending on how we work the remote piece, helping identify students online who might have a question or might need assistance, I think that would be a very interesting and successful program to try to implement. I see a lot of upside to that. I totally get the concern about safety. I don't think any of us want to put students or staff in harm's way. I do think it can be managed, and again, a lot of this comes around to my personal feelings and then even just the groups that we work with. If now is not the right time to try to go back to school in a limited capacity with some type of in-person instruction, again, with the metrics that we have, when is it going to be appropriate or safe to go back to school? And I don't have the second answer to that question because, again, you see different trends and different numbers being bandied about. There are some at the national level that indicate anything below a 10% positive testing rate would allow for some type of in-person learning, and that would be considered safe. Nationally, your teacher unions, which have been very vocal about this issue around staff safety and student safety, they were pushing for a 5% testing rate model. That's certainly something that we're going to need to negotiate with the unions. But even if at that 5% testing level in Massachusetts and even in our community, we're 2% or under at this point in time. So we're really at or below, significantly below that metric. And if we don't have a particular metric to use, again, I think it's very difficult to make these decisions on, kind of what's happening at the time or emotion. We've got to try to tie it to some type of scientific data and some type of metric, and I think that's the work that we should do over the course of the next number of weeks and months, because again, I do think this school year is going to be fluid, regardless of if we start full in person or if we start hybrid. At some point during the school year, we may have to flip to the other, and these are conversations I think we need to start now, but obviously continue with over the course of the year. So I personally want to just thank, I'm sure there are a lot of people watching. The survey input was significant. It wasn't a lengthy survey, but I appreciate people taking the time to read the background information and providing that. I don't know that we've received 80% response to a survey recently, so that was certainly a good response.
All right, why don't we start with questions that people have, and then we can make individual comments on what people think would be the best option. So we'll just go around the horn. So we'll start with Donna, work our way around, and so Donna.
Yeah, my first thought is, I understand what you're saying about the metrics, but it can't be reduced to something that simple. It's just much, much more complicated than that. And I think that we need to take a look at the whole picture in terms of what it is that we would be expecting for our students and our teachers to be able to deliver in the hybrid model. And so actually one of the things that I wanted to know is, like, walk me through a day. Like, what does it look like? Okay, because I've seen the schedule, but then there's the reality of what we actually have to do in the classroom. Okay, so, I think that would be really helpful. And I'm talking about from the moment that the kids get in the car and they arrive to school, because we took transportation away from, quite a few people. So what is that going to look like? Do kids get out of the car and walk 6 feet apart and then go to the classroom and sit 6 feet apart? And then, what happens? There's no rug time, there's no, they're sitting in their desks, okay? Are we using paper and pencil types of materials, or are they going to be on their computer? I mean, I have so many questions about, what this is going to look like from K right through 12. So any insight that you could provide me on that would be greatly appreciated. And now I'll kick it over to you.
You want to, again, any?
I mean, from my perspective, one of the things obviously that we had to take off the table a couple of weeks ago, and none of us wanted to,
Absolutely.
right, was the student transportation piece. When we looked at those student transportation guidelines, they made it just operationally impossible to be able to transport even the students that we legally were obligated to transport. So I think John coined it, but we were presented with a number of just bad decisions to make, and we had to pick the best decision of a bunch of bad decisions, or best solution from a bunch of bad ones. I think from the data that we've actually seen, we potentially would be able to now, if you adopted a hybrid model, actually offer transportation to more students. because if the numbers do hold true, and we had a third of students who are going to remain remote regardless, you've now taken those out of the mix. If we're only transporting half the students, and again, I know the numbers aren't perfect, but if we're doing half the students in the A group and half the students in the B group, I think that's going to open up significant room on our buses. Now, again, if we get to that point, one of the things I might recommend, because I don't want to be, Joanna will kill me, I don't want to be, taking fees from people and reimbursing them and taking fees and reimbursing them. I would say that we probably just launch the school year again not knowing, and just try to open up slots to people. Don't worry about the funding right now, but just try to figure out a way to get as many students transportation that necessarily need it into our schools. Worry about the money piece of it later. I think that would actually lessen the amount of traffic that we're going to see at the schools. If we don't, obviously there's going to be increased traffic, but I think that would help significantly. I think there is going to have to be, over the course of this next month, almost like a public relations type campaign. You saw, like, when the different schools would come in and produce their videos, and they would say, what's acceptable behavior on a bus? We'll be queuing up this, what's acceptable behavior under COVID? You stay the 6 feet apart. And again, I think even when you looked at the different recommendations, like we said, we were going to be the most stringent on everything. We weren't going to go 3 feet. We were going to go 6 feet. So we will work with our schools to actually put that literature together, put together, like those bus campaigns and things like that, to educate kids about what school will look like or what the expectations are, so that when they come, they know it is going to be different. Drop-off is going to be different. It's probably going to be spaced. What used to take 10 minutes to start a school day is going to take 20. So all that is going to have to happen. After we had district-level teams, we actually then had school-level teams start to convene to take a look at, as simply as, like walking routes within schools, what pathways are going to look like. What is, if someone has to go to the bathroom, what does that look like to make sure that you don't have 4 or 5 kids, congregating in a bathroom? And that also then has to be kind of broken down into age-appropriate, kid and child related messaging, so that they know, this is how I wait to go to the bathroom. This is how I wait if I have to go see a teacher or a nurse or whatnot. So we, over the course of the next month, would have to really break that down for families. It is going to look different, even within the classroom. I mean, as Linda indicated, you would actually have rows of desks. If you had 8 students in front of you, you might have 2 different rows of, 4 and 4. The desks would be spaced, 6 feet apart at least. Our classes can certainly accommodate that. We were running into trouble keeping the 6 feet when you were trying to get to, probably 14, 15 desks in a class. If we only have 8 to 10, there's more than enough room to be able to provide that space, even in our smallest rooms. But again, instruction is going to look different. We didn't feel that, say, elementary kids could sit in that same desk for more than 4 hours. We're going to have to introduce, little breaks, mask breaks. In my mind, when the kids come in and they kind of get to the classroom in the morning, they do their morning meeting. You've got your 8 kids in front of you. You've got other kids joining the class remotely. Maybe you do your literacy block. At that point, when you take a break, we could work with our food service staff, kind of provide the snack, the breakfast for the kids, because again, they're going home to have lunch in the afternoon. A lot of our elementary kids do eat before coming to school because we don't start until 9 o'clock. But that meal that we give them in the classroom at that point in time, will help get them to the afternoon, so that they don't have to have lunch at school. They can get on the bus, with a bagged lunch or whatever they decide, and go home for the afternoon. But I think it would provide, the teacher and the support staff in the classroom, a good solid literacy block, a good solid mathematics block, with the materials in the classroom to be able to introduce all of that learning.
So, I'm sorry,
go
excuse
ahead.
me. So we've got our kids sitting at the desks, and now it's time for their break. What does that look like? Like, we just say, do they get up? Do they move around? Do they go outside? Because they can't be closer than 6 feet, right? That's what we're going to be enforcing. So what is that going to look like for these kids? Because I understand what you're saying about the numbers and the distancing and all of this, but I'm trying to view it from the experience of these kids who are going to be in this hybrid model. What is it going to feel like for them? And I also understand that we have to, still make these plans. But I think when parents are trying to make decisions about what it is that they would like their kids to do, I think that they have to have a clear picture of what it is that we're really talking about. okay? That the teacher's gonna be at the front of the room. Are they gonna have paper and pencil tasks? Are they gonna have books in front of them? Or are we going to rely on their device to be able to turn in this work? And then, you know, from the teacher's perspective, after they're done with these materials, are they gonna be cleaned and put back? Are they just assigned to individual kids? And what does this look like? Or how is a kid is going to experience this, is I guess what I'm trying to get at.
I think, you know, kids, and I'll let Linda jump in a second. When it comes to materials, you know, we even talked like this school year, we as a district ended up buying the back-to-school supplies for kids. Number one, to help a little bit financially, you know, with this particular point in time, we wanted to do that. But we also know that kids aren't going to be sharing like they used to share. So when it comes to individual classroom supplies, you know, crayons, boxes, things like that, everyone's going to basically have their own sets of materials. You know, some schools have discussed possibly having, you know, like a couple of desk options where, you know, student A always leaves their materials in their desk and that's their stuff. Student B has their own. Obviously, they all have to get cleaned at the same time because kids are inevitably going to touch someone else's desk. But no, they're going to have their own stuff. I mean, I see them using manipulatives and paper and things like that when they're in the classroom. When they're remote, they're going to have to remote in, obviously, using their technology.
Okay.
But I think, again, we don't know 100% what this is all going to roll out to. But from the parents I've talked to, and even just from the discussions I've been in, there is significant value. You know, as a teacher, you know, I would want to meet my kids early on for as long as I can. And whether it's 2 weeks or 2 months or whatnot, there's significant value in that time. I think a lot of our parents are nervous, and I think rightly so, even on the remote portion of their work. It's very difficult for an elementary school student to be on a computer, whether they're watching the lesson or they're doing lessons, you know, remotely. Kids aren't used to being on the computer for 4 or 5 hours at a time. So that's not a great trade-off either. Again, these are not optimal decisions we're making. The hybrid option just provides choice, and it provides an option for people who want it, and there is still an option for people who don't. I don't know, Linda, you were actually part of the group that talked a little bit about what the classroom design would look like and makeup. Do you mind addressing that a little?
Yeah, so some of the things that are in works that we've already started to talk about, because whether you're in a hybrid or you're in a remote, there are certain materials, like for example, our guided reading books, they're not individual books. So we're already working with the publishing company, okay, what's digitized, what can we project up on the board, because you're still gonna take a small group of kids to do guided reading. You're gonna need to be able to have that book available for them to see, to actually do the guided reading. Any of the other individual materials, such as, you know, when you get into the upper grades, the textbooks, we have a textbook per student, so that's not gonna be a problem. Same with the materials, same with the manipulatives as well. Like, we would just have to sort all of these pieces out. We'll try and digitize as much as possible, but even if students have like paper and pencil, I would imagine that, you know, for me, I would be like, okay, you're gonna come up, you're gonna project that on the board. We have the document cameras, so you're gonna try and keep that physical touch, you know, at a minimum or not at all. But then students would not have hand materials. Everything can't just be digitized for a student online, because that's just not how it works. It's still group works, it's still the speaking and listening skills that we have to go through. So we would just have to re-image how we do it, because we would be doing that for the remote anyways, because the students wouldn't necessarily have all the materials in front of them at home.
Thank you.
We'll just go around and we can come back. So Jeff, you have a question?
So if we were to just say, go with the hybrid, when do you see a timeline for parents to make the decision? When will we have the information, Donna, we're all interested, in place so that we can go ahead? I know we're planning on starting school after Labor Day.
Right.
But do you see any kind of timeline that we can find, you know, when we could say to parents, all right, we need to know what you want to do?
Yeah, what I see happening, and again, we'll let other people jump in too, but if the committee were to make that decision tonight, you know, we would probably spend the rest of the week finalizing the documents for parents to talk specifically about what the hybrid model would look like. Again, your sample schedules, your sample days, the very high-level district information. Again, we've got 7 different schools, so it's going to look a little different in 7 buildings. But that high-level information to allow them to make the decision about what the in-person hybrid will look like, but we also need to educate them about what remote would look like, because they're still going to have that option. And I really want to make sure that whatever we do, people are very clear that we have the remote option and they say the hybrid, because I don't want there to be confusion. And I don't want people being more scared than they already are about knowing what their options are. But we would, I would say, by the end of the week, early next week at the latest, put out, basically, it wouldn't be anonymous anymore. It wouldn't be like voluntary, but people actually need to make a decision. And we would probably give them, a week to 10 days, which would bring us close to coming up on that week before Labor Day, to make that decision. At the same time, our HR office has sent kind of a questionnaire out, again, it's not anonymous to staff, to try to identify if any of our staff have issues returning to work under the various models, whether it's the hybrid or the remote model. So they're already capturing that data. When I talked to them earlier today, they've already had greater than a 60% return just after the day that it's been out there. So we would then have that data over the next week and a half or so to be able to kind of match up and see, based on our students who are opting for full remote, even under the hybrid, what our staff are aligned with. If we have staff that have health concerns for either them or someone that they care for, being able to see if there's matches to setting up a remote option with staff and students separate from our, the hybrid, the AB group. Because again, that group would be kind of interchangeable. So they might be hybrid, they might have to go remote, they come back to hybrid. I don't want to have the two strands be dependent on each other if that's the way we went. So, that would be happening. I would see all of this being organized. Again, the schools will probably, as Linda alluded to, do some type of an initial alignment. It makes sense to do it by alphabet to kind of separate your two cohorts. But then we know that families, again, vertically, you might have kids at the elementary, middle, high school level. They're going to want to go to school on the same days, even for daycare. And to one of the speakers earlier tonight, would there be option for some switch and play? Yes, once we have people kind of situated, if we have the ability to, we've got some flexible people and someone really needs the Monday, Tuesday option and can trade with someone for the Thursday, Friday, as long as we lock those groups in before we get going, we'd be fine. So this would all be happening, I would say, between now and, Labor Day. And that would then give us, that long weekend and even the first couple of weeks in September to really notify people and get everything in place. And we'd be working with the teachers, because they, even though the kids aren't coming, the teachers would be coming. So we'd be able to prepare and be working with them the week before Labor Day and also the first couple of weeks in September before we kicked everything off.
Thank you.
John?
Sure. So I have two questions, but they're related. Can I just pair them together? The first question is, if we decide on remote, can we revisit it when conditions change and move into a hybrid model? Or are we trapped in remote for a year?
No, I guess the reason for approving the 3 plans is that you could have the fluid move between plans. I guess my concern would be if we opt for the full remote to begin the school year, without kind of saying what that metric is going to be, or what would be a better situation to then move to hybrid. I don't know when we naturally would move.
There could be a vaccine in November, who knows?
Well, if it's a vaccine, yeah, you could say, as a committee, you want to stay fully remote, and if vaccine is the threshold you want to hit, then we know we're out until there's a vaccine.
Yep.
Other than that, it would have to be figuring out what health metric is going to be acceptable to then move back to an in-person or a remote, a hybrid type option.
Okay, and the second question, which is kind of related, will parents be able to change their model? So if they went remote in the beginning of the year and they feel conditions change, can they reach out to the district and say, okay, I think it's safe to send my kid to school?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. However, there are going to be some hurdles to overcome. So if you start out in person, let's say, and it's not working for you and you decide you want to go remote, that's going to be pretty easy to accomplish, all right? Because you already had a seat. We're basically just putting you in the remote school. That's not too challenging. If you start out in remote and then you decide you want to go in person, we're probably going to have to hit some or make some kind of designated times when we would do those switches. You couldn't just call us on a Friday and say all of a sudden you want to come back, because we've got to look and make sure that the cohorts are balanced.
Yep.
If we don't have an extra desk at that point in time to allow another student into, we don't want to jeopardize the cohort that's been together health-wise.
Right.
So we'd probably just have to come up with some milestones. Maybe it's at the quarter, so maybe it's at the report card quarter, maybe it's at the half-year point, or if it's a semesterized program at the high school. Yes, there would be the option to be able to come back, but it wouldn't be like overnight. you'd have to work with us and we'd have to make some adjustments. It'd be much easier to go in person to remote
Sure.
than it would
Makes
the
sense.
other way.
Maria?
Okay, so, in terms of both, we're gonna be running two models if we decide to go with hybrid initially to open. So we would be running a whole separate school remotely and a hybrid model, which also includes remote in some portion of it. So we're looking at staffing, is that true? Two separate full models.
So in a remote situation, because I know this is a lot even like for the public, so I'm trying to break it down. I would see at this point, based on the numbers, that if we have a third of the population that's going to go full remote, and based on our, say, even staffing data, just the ballpark data we have to date, I would probably propose us running a parallel full remote program from our hybrid program, right?
Okay.
Because our hybrid program, our As and Bs, right, with classroom teachers, let's say they start hybrid, but they then have to go remote and they go back to hybrid. I would want them to be able to flow within their own program. Separate from, if we know you're just going remote, and we know that we have staff that are only going to be remote, we would look, again, it's not perfect, but we would look to see if we could basically match up those cohorts. And we might have, say, a fourth grade full remote cohort with a designated fourth grade teacher who was running separate from the other system. So that, I think that would be easier to manage, if that makes any sense.
Okay, so let's say that in a classroom, we have a child who tests positive or a teacher who tests positive, and that entire group is not able to come to school
Right.
for 14 days. If that were to be so, they would be in what model?
Okay, that's a good example, but let's think about it this way. So if we had, we're gonna call that the hybrid model, okay? So that's kind of running over here. At the same time, in your option, we had 24 kids in a class. So you've got 16 kids in your hybrid model, and you have 8 kids that are running in a parallel track in your virtual school. Your 8 kids in your virtual school aren't affected, because they
Right.
have their own teacher and they're just rolling along. Over here in your hybrid model, if a student tests positive in that class, teacher, whatnot, that whole 2 sections would basically have to go out for 2 weeks. So while they go out, there's a couple of different scenarios. Let's say a student tests positive, but is not having any effects, can go to school remotely, they'd be able to go to school remotely. That teacher would have to switch to basically for a couple of weeks, be a remote teacher. So they're already doing remote with their class, but the whole class, those 16 kids, would just now be remote for 2 weeks.
Okay,
You could reassess, there's all guidelines, but after the 2 weeks, basically, if we have clear testing and whatnot, then they might be able to be reintroduced to the school. And they
Okay.
would then come back in person.
so keeping with that, let's say that the teacher gets very sick, and I hope not, and then you need a substitute, what happens?
So if so again, there's 2 scenarios. The teacher may test positive, but might be asymptomatic. They might be fine.
Right.
We still move remote, and they might still opt to be teaching from home. That could be fine.
Right,
If they actually were incapacitated and they couldn't teach, then we have to have a substitute.
right,
So what we would be looking to do is actually keep within the building, right, building-based staff
Okay.
to be able to fill in. So we know under that hybrid model that there are some staff members in the building that aren't going to have, say, necessarily a full caseload if you look at your specialists or other staff in the building. We would be basically pairing up the extra adult staff in the building, potentially even, a classroom para if they happen to be there as well, so that we have that backup within the building, so that we're not reintroducing someone from the outside as much
Okay.
as possible into that situation. So it might be, let's say a specialist might actually be the default backup for the time being. That could be a scenario.
okay, so that so far for me is looking like great possibilities. I see that happening in elementary school. I see that possibly happening through the middle school. What happens at the high school?
It gets more challenging.
Because I don't want a para, I'm thinking of the quality of education
Right.
in addition to the safety of education.
Right.
So when we're talking about the quality, if online in the distance learning, calculus is being taught by a para versus calculus is being taught by the teacher who's fully
Right.
capable of doing it, it is a very different situation. So what would happen at the high school?
Right. Even, let's back up for 1 second to the elementary. Like, even, let's say for a day or two, like a para, someone else in the building might be able to step in. If this was going to be a long-term situation, we would have to look for a long-term certified person to step in and fill that role. I was talking kind of short-term. It gets more difficult as you go up grade level. So when you get to middle school and you get to high school and you've got like content specialization, yeah, if the physics teacher goes out, you can't just put the para in the classroom, or even a Spanish teacher can't go teach physics. But this happens even, during the regular school year. What we would have to do is, again, if that teacher could still teach, they certainly could teach remotely. If they couldn't and they physically were sick and we had to replace them, we'd have to probably first look within the department to see if someone else could, help even temporarily pick up a section. We've had situations where, even last year, a department coordinator has to step in and they have the content knowledge and actually teach a section. So we would have to do something along those lines.
Okay, that's in terms of that. Now, I'm gonna keep going along
Well,
with,
can we go back around
Okay.
again? Okay.
go ahead.
I'll ask, I know you put some sample draft schedules. Can you just run us through one of them, what it would look, you pick. I mean, high school, middle school, the elementary school one's very confusing to me, but the other two I can cut out.
Colorful, though.
It's colorful, but I, don't- maybe run through that one, because that one, I guess, is,
The elementary one?
Sure.
For the hybrid?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's a lot of things in here that you probably don't even understand what it means, like what's a KAB, and an F and all of that good stuff. So, in an elementary one, what you're seeing, and you're seeing actually in all of them, is that typically kids would have upwards of like 4 classes in school prior to being dismissed, right? Elementary's a little different because they have, their literacy blocks and their math
You want
blocks.
to pull it up on the screen?
Yeah.
That would be helpful.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Oh, you're pulling it up?
I'll do it. Oh, you already have it?
Well, I'm kind of reading.
Oh, then pull it up.
Well, you can too, it doesn't matter. 6 1/2 doesn't at this point.
I'll flip a coin.
I'm off, so you can jump on.
I think parents would like to see it too.
Everybody just wants to see my lovely colors. Not sure why it's not picking me up yet. Did you put the TV on?
I did.
I can hear the feedback too, I'm not sure what's happening.
Mute your microphone on your laptop.
No, I don't have any.
Yeah, well, you, give me a second, I'll pull it up for you.
All right. Are we still getting feedback?
Getting weird.
I think
Late
that's actually,
feedback,
it's telemedia. I can hear Tom's voice.
Oh, I was gonna say, it's not me. I'm not sorry. So I'll talk while he pulls it up. So, high school, let me just walk you through high school and middle school just for a second, because if you notice, you'll see that 4 of their classes are prior. Oh, I gotta wait for them to pick the feedback. Tom, we got feedback. Yeah, I'm gonna delay feedback.
we're gonna start with the high school one, though?
Yeah, it's gotta be something with that piece. So if you start, just even in the high school and the middle school, all of the classes are actually front-loaded for the 4 of the 5 classes would be before students would actually leave school. And the 5th class that they would join in, the last class they would join in remotely at the end of the day. It's similar with your middle school as well. So you're doing the majority of your classes in school, then there's that dismissal time. That's it.
Did you want the high school one?
Yep.
Okay.
So you'll see that they'll have their, right, if you're looking at the hybrid one, normally kids students take 5 classes. We've reduced it to 4, but kept them in their rotation. The high school follows what's called a waterfall schedule. So it's an A through F schedule, but you drop 2 typically. So you go A, B, C, D, E, drop G and F, and then you put them into the next group. What we did is we reduced it to a 4-class rotation for students, and what we would have them do is go to A, B, and C, then there'd be the dismissal for students to get home. We'd still keep the plus block in place because that's where we're gonna start doing a lot of like the social emotional work, making sure counselors can meet with students. And then their last class of D those would both be remote. So they're getting all of the classes. We're not stopping the rotation. We're not stopping the program of studies for students because we didn't want to reduce that because that could affect colleges. And then they would then pick up their schedule starting the next day, E, F, G, plus, and you start with A. So it looks a little confusing to people, but there's a nice rotation that goes through our high school schedule.
Okay, so
So
with
what
the
we
AA,
thought-
the AABB model, so Monday, Tuesday, the A's are going through those
In
in
person,
person, but the B's are going through that same cycle
online.
while that class is going on. So the teacher's there,
Correct.
he's got 6 kids in front of him and 6 kids at home.
Right, hopefully it's a
time.
little bit more than that.
What
but-
about Wednesday? Does Wednesday the B, C, D?
So Wednesday, if all students are home.
Okay, so
and
they're all gonna be remote
everybody's
that day,
remote.
and then,
Thursday, Friday, the B students
Are gonna
would follow
follow.
the rotation.
okay, okay.
And then the other ones would be remote.
Okay.
And that would just, every week, that schedule would just start to go through
Yep.
over and over and over again, right? Because it's really hard at the high school level to say you can't have this course compared to this course because the students aren't in teams, right? And many students, based on their needs or their desires, would like to have certain coursework that they would like to take. So in order to keep the program of studies intact, you would want to keep your schedule intact, but then limit the movement with the one-way hallways, whoever could teach in the same classroom. Humanities, it's a little bit easier, but when you start getting to the technical classes, that would be on the bottom floor. Our sciences, our robotics classes, students need to physically get to those rooms, so that's where they would have to have the nuance on those days. What, anybody that's new to high school, what they may not know is that teachers they don't go to class every single day in English, every single day in social studies, so they're either seeing their teachers 3 times to 4 times a week, based on the schedule. So the movement's limited. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So if you just mind switching over to the
Can
middle
we
school
ask
one?
questions
Yeah, do you have
on the
any question on
schedule?
the high school question?
Yeah.
Oh, on the schedule? No, I don't have a
Yeah,
question on
go ahead.
schedule.
High
Go ahead.
school
I do
question?
on this
Yep.
Yep.
Right. On the plus block, you started talking a little bit about that, and you talked about social, emotional, and so on.
Yep.
One of the things that's been pointed out to me by students is that plus block, typically they choose the people that they're going to be associating with during that time. And it's a big thing during high school. So, what do you envision that looking like online?
I think
Because
that
it's always gonna be online.
Yeah, it would have to be online, so we'd have to find out where the students are gonna go. They use a program right now where students can be placed with specific teachers based on their needs. We're gonna have to, within that plus block, whether it's physically still in the same room or like groups of students virtually meet with teachers somewhere else, like, okay, all the math students that need to see this teacher can go to this area. Because to have everybody in the room talking at the same time might get a little, a little crazy. But they will have to come up with their larger spaces and to see how they can actually have students access those teachers with the same program that they use in order to have the conversations that they need to have. So I could
Okay.
envision a little bit of maybe virtual and maybe in person based on where the student's located in the high school. And those are the nuances that they would have to figure out for that plus block piece. The plus block, if you notice on there, is if they were physically in, but they're online with that, so they would just be logging in with their teacher. So if I needed to see 5 students, I would create a meets, and the 5 students that are assigned to me or who have asked to come see me would just log into that meeting with me, and I would work with them at that point.
Okay, so that's plus block. Now, in addition to that with high school, while this hybrid learning model is going on, and this is the schedule for hybrid, there's a teacher assigned to each class and so on. What's happening in the remote,
We would have to,
in the fully remote?
Well,
How is that
you
being
would have a couple
staffed?
of options. So you could do fully remote and have teachers that are assigned just to students that are in remote. The other thing, when you get to grades 7 through 12, you could assign a specific teacher, because they teach 5 sections, right? You could assign a teacher a section that's completely remote, and those students would then go see that remote teacher,
Okay.
because they would be, they would have the ability to be able to do that. So 4 of my sections are doing the hybrid 2-2, and 1 of my sections is completely remote. 7 through 12, you have a little bit more flexibility with that.
All
So
right,
to answer your question back when it was elementary, yes, that makes a little bit more sense. 5 and 6, few nuances between that. 7 through 12, you have an opportunity that if we saw the numbers that X amount of kids really wanted to be remote, and that was gonna affect our staffing, we could drop one and have them teach that class
So that's in
completely remote.
fact a lot more like university, where you're teaching live and you're also teaching in remote, and the teacher could be staffing both models.
Correct, and that will
essentially.
help us with our singleton classes. So if it's only an AP, one AP
Okay.
class, you would have to be able to have that option.
Several people have written in questions about the quality of the teaching at these higher levels in our education system. So that's important to know for me if I'm making a choice that I'm gonna go totally remote and stay within the system, that I could still be getting the teacher that is good,
Yeah, you would
you know.
still have a certified, qualified teacher. We wouldn't just suddenly staff it with
And
somebody.
there are, well, 2 points I want to make. There are teachers. Like, there are our own high school teachers who will be teaching. It's not like someone else's teacher. But am I correct in saying if you have like those singleton high-level courses and you happen to pick remote, you might actually just remote into the existing class?
Correct.
Correct, while the other instruction is taking place.
Right.
It wouldn't be that there'd be a separate class for you.
All right.
Because if there's a teacher that only teaches like 1 or 2 of those like high-level sections, we don't have the ability to have an online class for just a handful of students. So if you opt for the remote option, you might just be synchronously coming in to participate in that class via the computer.
Okay.
All right, go to the middle school?
The middle school?
Could I ask one quick
Yeah.
question on the high school
Sorry.
schedule? So this was a question from some parents. We're looking at dismissal time, and then we, again, not providing transportation, and, you know, as you said, we really had no choice. Some kids may be walking quite a distance to be able to get home. Will this allow them enough time to be able to get home, grab lunch, and then log into their next class?
12:15 would be an hour and 20 minutes. They
So
might be
this-
eating
they're getting
through the next
dismissed
class.
at 11:15-ish, okay. And then so they're,
I mean, the last technical class of the day is what, 12:46?
Their last technical class of the day is actually 1:51, but in the building is 11:15.
11:15, then they leave, right?
Right,
Correct.
and then they come back for plus block, which would be at, does that say 12? Because I'm
It does
too
say
far
So
12.
away.
they have
So-
about 45 minutes.
Right,
45 minutes to get home.
right, 45 minutes, and then their last technical class to get into, because we might, if you have to make an accommodation, would not be until 12:46.
Other questions on the high school schedule?
Did you
I have a
hand up?
general schedule question. These are complicated.
They are.
What is the communication plan, whatever model we go with, to communicate this with parents in an in-depth way? We don't have enough time to go through all of this in any kind of detail that's gonna be memorable for people, so what's the plan?
So high school is complicated, but they receive a planner, and a planner would be adjusted. So I walk around with a planner, everybody has a planner, we call it our book, right? And, because what they'll say is it's an A day, and they'll have to follow that schedule, so we would just adjust the planner to
The
be able
kid,
to let
so
parents know.
this is very complex. The kids at the high school already do this, though. This
No,
is
no, I
already the
get that,
schedule
but
that they have.
there's 2 other grade levels.
Well,
so-
no, yeah, we're gonna have to break it down, like, at the middle school, in my opinion, and the elementary level, we're gonna have to kind of show more of the generic, chunks of time when they're there, and not probably the specificity of exactly what, it'd be like learning block, break, things like that. It'll be a little bit easier for them to understand.
The question was, what's the plan for communication with parents? I mean, are we gonna sit down on a Zoom session?
Oh, okay, so,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there'll be, like, say, the written document that would
Yep.
go out that would explain all of this. And then I do think over the next, probably 2 to 3 weeks, we're gonna have to host several remote, kind of like community forum,
Okay.
type events, where,
That was the
they might
question.
be targeted towards different levels. So we might host one, say, only for high school, one for middle, one for elementary. And, the appropriate people will get on and actually explain all of this to parents.
And it'll be recorded and available for people
Yeah,
that can't make it?
we'll do
Okay.
it live, but then we'll record them.
Yep.
And we'll post them to the site, so if you miss it, you can no matter which model we pick. I think we have to do that, just so that people can know what they're signing on for.
And even for your high school students, with the schedule, they're gonna know that they're just missing one course. They're used to that schedule, so they'll actually know what that is about. It's your incoming freshmen. So through the mentor program, they're gonna have to re-envision how that mentor program would be virtually rather than face-to-face. And the students would still be assigned a mentor coming into high school, and that's kind of the key, or any new students. Did you wanna add to that?
I was just wondering, the plus block, are we gonna treat it, I haven't been in the high school in a while, but plus block, it was the same students with the same teachers for 4 years, or are we gonna treat it more like the Pride block?
Yeah, so what they did is they did, they could do one of either way, right? They could stay with that one teacher and it acted more like as a homeroom and a time for kids to kind of just take that break, that brain break, and figure out what they need to be. Or they could use it to actually see specific teachers, but it could be a combination, because the counselors are gonna still wanna have access to students and be able to go through some of those pieces, or if you have a specific, program that you wanna push through. So I could see it being a little bit of both. But it's both, they're all gonna be home, so they wouldn't necessarily be sitting with the teacher per se. We just need to know that they're somewhere, right, logged into doing whatever they need to do.
So they would have to log in for that period?
Correct. So it could be like if I'm a counselor in a house and I'm running a program, they're logging into that meet to go do that program as a junior. But if you're, a sophomore and you need to go see one of your teachers to get some support, they'd be logging into that teacher's meets.
So I guess, so if I'm a plus block teacher, what's my responsibility?
To be available for the students that are gonna need the support for your content area.
Okay, all right.
So they might just be like an open,
Yep.
the kids might schedule, because they know they need you, and there'd be like an open window where the kids would come in and they would have access to you.
Okay, thanks.
So in terms of the schedule, okay, so you got kids sub at home, some in the classroom, internet goes down, right? Tree falls on a power line. What are we giving the students and the parents in terms of flexibility if they miss a class? I mean, is it a disciplinary action if they miss a class, or is it,
No.
what's the,
Whether,
if they miss a class, do they get to make it up? Like, what's the process for that? Because we don't control the conditions for
Right,
remote
it would be
people.
like any other time. I mean, that could happen to us in person. We lose everything, and you gotta just revamp, and you come up with a different plan, and then you would give them time to obviously redo the lesson. The teachers aren't gonna, there's no discipline if we suddenly go down.
It's not really about discipline, it's more about what's the plan, right?
I mean,
They'd
to
have
be
to
honest with you,
readjust
like
their-
that did happen last spring, and if something like that happens, I think the key is just for the communication. So if the parent or the child goes down, they just need to reach out to the teacher. I didn't hear of one situation where people weren't understanding. I think people understood that, there was a technical error or whatnot. You make an arrangement to be able to make up the work or the assignment.
Right.
If
But last
it
year, we
wa-
didn't have schedules. It was kind of a free-for-all, right? So it was a little more
Right, well, this
flexible.
is gonna be more structured.
Right, and my concern is the structure will add in, when we talked about it last week, we said, what about a kid that needs one-on-one time? They need help with math, and you're like, well, they're gonna be teaching to a schedule. How are we gonna really break out one-on-one time for students? I mean,
Yeah, but I do think that, like, that can actually be coordinated when we get into the schedule. Like, if there is a mathematics block and there's a child that needs additional help, they may be participating in the regular class. There's also gonna be like, say, like a special ed, time, where they might be logging in to get some one-on-one time with a special educator. There's gonna be times like baked in to the schedule where they can access the services.
okay,
And I can envision too that, before school, after school time, like we typically do, sometimes I'd say, log in with me earlier, I'll go over that's what teachers do, right? They meet up with students even outside of the classroom to help them, and it may even be like through different forms of communication. It could be just as simple as an email or an example of a program. We also are digitizing all of our curriculum, so everything will be sitting on Google Classroom for them to access when they come back on.
Okay, so I've gotten questions from several students who had established their schedule for high school.
Yep.
And so they're wondering what happens with the course, theater, those art type of classes, or even an art class with sharing materials and so on. Is the intention to try to keep them within the schedule, or maybe use technology that allows to do what happened at graduation, which was immensely incredible, to be able to synchronize the voices and the instruments and so on, which costs money. What is our plan in terms of the arts?
Yep, so that is the integrity of that schedule, because your B block could be your art block, but my art block would be a D block. So they're still gonna go through with their teachers. The teachers are gonna be obviously imagining what that's gonna look like if there's physical materials or instruments, spacing. I know that there was talks too, even at the high school, about using different areas, because they have to be 10 feet apart. So the Performing Arts Center, larger places like that. So yes, we want to keep the program of studies intact, but there will be some changes, obviously, to many classes, but those classes in particular, because there are student materials.
In remote, how does that work? If you choose remote model?
They would still be working on it differently. They could be using, like you said, a program to then be chiming in with their peers for music. They could be, for art, they could be submitting their work digitally, right? Snapping pictures of it, that type of stuff. So they would have to, again, reimagine how that's gonna look like both ways, because all students are gonna be remote at some point on their off days. So there has to be a way to be able to do it. And honestly, those departments were the most creative in the spring to come up with a lot of different options for students and still teach the standards. It wasn't like they went off and did something completely different. They were the ones that came forward with some of the better ideas than some of us would have for options if you were in a traditional classroom.
All right, thank you.
Okay, anything else in the high school model before we move on?
Just for, because I'm technologically backward. So when I was teaching at the college, I used my laptop. So now if I'm in class and students are at home, remote, will there be new technology, like a camera or something? You know what I mean?
Yeah, you would need to use, like our clear touch TVs all have cameras on them. Any place that didn't have a camera, we've already talked to Bill Silver, the
Okay.
Director of Technology, and he has a plan for that.
So it wouldn't have to be dependent
Yeah.
upon.
I can't remember how
No,
many.
I mean, and that's actually where those, and Bill was like thrilled. I don't know if you happen to be at the school sometimes walking around, the new Clear Touch panels that are on, they're not mounted to the wall, they're on the rolling cart. They're unbelievable. So those are gonna be a huge asset to teachers with their teaching, because you can just configure that to basically be showing up on the screen. And if they're doing a lesson, the kids at home can be watching the lesson that they're writing right on the board. They're unbelievable. So I think that's gonna be helpful, and they do have the built-in cameras and the ability to record and, upload to Google Docs and classrooms and things. So that's gonna be a great technology.
And even if there's not a clear touch TV, like I actually have one of the cameras, because I don't have a clear touch TV in my office. I have a very large screen. You would think I would have a clear touch, but we've actually put one of the cameras up on it because it didn't come with a camera, and the clarity in them are unbelievable. And then I would obviously have like a Google Meet up, and through Google Meet, you just swap share your desktop or your laptop, and the students are gonna see exactly what the other students are seeing.
That would be true in hybrid or remote, correct?
Okay, any other questions on the high school schedule before we?
It's only on the schedule, okay.
Yeah, just on the schedule.
Because certain things came up
Yeah,
that.
yeah, we'll just do the
'Cause, yeah, I
schedule
think we
first, and we
should-
can come
We
back.
do the
Oh, yeah, we'll
schedules,
go
then
back
we can
around.
come back
That's
on it.
fine.
Could be going back around for a while. So if you wanna go to the middle school?
That's the remote.
This is
right?
middle school remote.
Right. So.
Which one do you want?
Yeah, a similar situation where, so when they say core classes, so basically you get almost like a 57-minute block, so that would be your English, math, science, and social studies. The students stay on team. And then again, they would do a staggered dismissal starting at 12 o'clock so that they're not all getting on the bus at the same time, because I can envision more kids would be on the bus at the middle school than maybe at the high school, to give them that opportunity to travel home again. And then what they would do is, typically, there's a block for world languages, specialists, and special ed, where it kind of rotates through depending on what grade level you're in. And those students would then re-log on at the 1:30 mark, right? Again, everything is, we put scheduled times up there, but there's always like 1:30-ish time. And if they're a 7th and 8th grader, they'd be taking world languages and/or they're specialists, right, depending on which block they're in there. And then same with grades 5 and 6. They would be flip-flopping between their specialist blocks and their arts block, and any special ed services that they would need online with students. Any of the special ed services that can be pushed into the regular classrooms would happen at that time. When you see 2 core for grade 5 and 6, they're team teachers, so a 5th grade teacher teaches social studies and ELA, so that's a chunk of time for those 2 subject areas. And then same for math and science, the teaming teacher is a math and science teacher. So what they do is they get that chunk of time, so it's not as if they're only getting 2 classes, they're getting 4 classes, but It just runs a little bit more elementary than it does a traditional middle school, junior high, for those of us that remember the old junior high. So that's why it looks a little different at that time, because we block off the time, because they also have some team times in there as well.
So they would have the same classes at the same time every day.
The student, actually, students typically rotate, but the teacher teaches the same block every time, so we'd have to see what that's gonna look like in that model.
But they're basically getting their 4 core classes in person.
Can I just make a quick comment? I'm getting a lot of emails about the vaccine comment being I had asked about, maybe it's a vaccine to go back. That's what we consider
right.
safe. Just to address it, because I've gotten a few emails on it, that is not the criteria right now. We'd all agree on the criteria. I just chose that as an example, just to clear that up. So I'm just getting a lot of emails.
You're
That's
not
just what you
Fauci?
threw out.
I am not Fauci, no.
Okay.
I am not.
So questions on the hybrid
Yeah.
model at the middle school?
Okay, so I have a question here. I read in your report here, in the reports that we got, that one of the middle schools, you can't fully accommodate, is it lunches, eating in the classrooms? You had
Was
to
that in the
use,
facilities report or in?
in the
I don't-
facilities report, there seemed to be a problem, you'd have to
That was
use.
in,
Okay.
but that was in full in person.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we're
All right.
not doing that now.
That's the
To
same
make
with
sure
the
that
high
people
school, they
have
would have to
enough
have more
time,
lunches to get.
Because eating something is important when they come into school in some of these cases.
Right. But no,
Okay.
that was the full in person, which we're not considering.
Okay.
If you were trying to get through all your different lunches, there wasn't gonna be enough space, that they were gonna have to consider doing lunch in alternate locations as well. That's where like the gym and things like that came in. But that's not a problem right now.
And that would be if you're serving it even in a hybrid too, at certain places, like the high school would have needed to do 4 lunches instead of 3 in order to provide it in a full day hybrid. So that was kind of the thought process around the truncated day, but not a half day schedule. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
And on this middle school schedule, another question, and I got the same thing on the high school. I've been getting questions about what's the thought about possibly including some activities into these schedules, allowing people to run some activities for students, maybe outside of what you're showing here.
Well, activities do run after school. They don't run during the regular school day.
Right, so is there a potential that if we are hybrid, there could possibly be some activities that would also run?
I would think that's the case. Again, it's not part of the regular day, but it's not during the regular school day, school year anyway. But once we get up and going with whatever model we're having, let's say it was the hybrid and we were partially in person, we'd have to figure out some of the scheduling issues, because if you only had half the kids in and the club met on one particular day, we might want to make sure that the next time they were going to meet, they met on, like say, the first time's a Tuesday, the second time's a Thursday, just so whatever kids actually get the opportunity to be there in person, and then the other kids might be able to remote in. But any of those things, like your kids or activities or specials, they're just gonna also have to maintain the social distancing rules that we put into place. But I think that's, it's certainly possible, but it wouldn't happen during the core day. It would be like an add-on. It would happen after hours.
Okay.
Just, can we clarify, and I don't remember if it was on this schedule, on which schedule it was, what's a mask break?
Time to take off your mask and,
That's more at the
Where?
elementary level.
yeah.
Yeah, like where?
Well, where?
Yeah, where do they take a mask break?
I mean, mostly, again, if you're just asking me, the example would be like at the elementary school level.
Yeah.
If the kids are obviously, they're just done their 90-minute literacy block, they need to shake off a little steam and move around a little bit. If I were that teacher, I'm gonna coordinate with the other teachers, but I'm gonna get my kids out of the chair, doing some type of activity. Might go for a walk if the weather permitting, outside. What's that?
That seems pleasant.
No, I know, it'd be fun. Where you can distance yourself, you only get 8 kids, you can give them plenty of distance, be able to take your mask off and
Okay.
take a little break, just to kind of stretch and move around a little bit.
Okay, any other questions on the middle school hybrid model? Okay, all right, elementary one.
Okay, so yeah, the elementary probably looks, that's the remote. Can I go one more down to the, okay. Yes, it's very
Oh, there it
colorful.
is.
Thank you very
Okay.
much. I think what you have to do is, in order to keep yourself, focused, the KAB and the KCDE is just those, we have 5 sections. So A section, that has nothing to do with anything anybody has to worry about. That's just for us to know that there's 5 sections that are up there. So really, a school day starts for students at 9 o'clock, and this is their start of the day. This is where you would see typically your morning meeting type of situation, but this is where we'd make sure that everybody's checking in, they're distance from each other, hand washing, any of those things you have to do. Morning meeting is more like it's both academic and social emotional, like you're going over, for example, like what is today, what's today's date, what's the weather, allowing students to have the speaking and listening skills to run that type of stuff. This is where you're working with kids like that came in and they had a bad morning, they started off bad. Kids have like almost like to-do work, they'll know what the schedule is gonna look like, they know where they're supposed to put their stuff. So typically at the elementary level, you take almost like the first 20 days to go over your expectations on how you pick out a book, where do you put your clothes, where do you put, how do you start your day?
So-
They're gonna have to incorporate what is this gonna look like in this model?
Are you, and again, the mass breaks thing, are there gonna be similar type of breaks for middle and high school?
Yes, but it's just that
be a
elementary,
little
you
bit
have to
less
really kind of
managed.
specify, because they're,
Because they're older?
yeah.
Okay.
And these classes are chunked together.
Okay.
So that 9:30 block, when you see like for grades K1, 2, and then 3 and 4, the F and the P, that's Foundations, that's our phonics program, so it's called Foundations, so they put an F there. And then the 3rd and 4th grade has the same kind of phonics component, but that's just our designated time, because we need to keep the integrity of the schedule for that new program that we bought. We bought Foundations for phonics, and then we have F and P for our reading program. So then, similar to what we do, we try to alternate the different math and the literacy and writing blocks, just so if students need to receive some services in between, that they'll be able to access them. So this is just your typical schedule, but you're seeing that they're front-loading it with the literacy and the math time, right? Because that's really one of the biggest, pushes, obviously, at the elementary level. They need to be literate and have some mathematics skills. And then what we would do is start the hand washing and dismissal time for 12:40, but then have them come back online. I'm not sure why the time is missing right there, but for them to go through their science and social studies block remotely, as well as their specialist block, and rotate them through. So they're seeing a similar piece, but elementary is a little bit more, we have to make sure that we have the blocks really spelled out for the students. High school is easy because the blocks are spelled out. Middle school, we know where the content areas are. That's a little bit simpler, but this one we have to really break it down, like when's their snack, when's their mass break, when they're,
This one too, again, you're seeing that mass break, but that would be like when you do the break, but you also have a little something to eat
Yep.
to get them through the day until dismissal time.
Can
So,
you approve some capital for picnic tables?
What's that?
You can approve some capital for picnic tables outside?
Socially distanced picnic tables.
Yeah.
so some of the questions I've gotten on this schedule is if specialists are only working and only doing classes remotely in the afternoon, what's their rest of their day look like?
we're gonna have to pair them up with other classroom teachers to see where we can actually fit in some of the even specialist skills. It falls very nicely definitely with your humanities side of it. You really can have some of those, art skills, those PE skills, anything that goes along with it. So we're gonna couple them with their classroom teachers for right now. This is the thought process, right? Because this is the working groups at the schools. They're thinking about what this
Okay.
is gonna imagine. And they'll actually almost like gonna be in a team teaching model with them, so they can incorporate as much as possible with their skills into like those blocks.
And again, this is the group that we're gonna rely on heavily in the event that the classroom teacher is required to be out for sickness. This group would step in and keep
They're
the
teaming up.
classroom afloat, right?
So, just, did you have any more? I don't want to.
Go right ahead, John.
Questions about paras. So aren't paras for a specific purpose? Like, so when you're talking about like IEPs and whatnot, aren't there paras that are specific to that? Will they be doing things outside of their IEP duties?
Well, some are and some aren't. I mean, you have general, like instructional paras, that might just be helping a classroom in general. You also have some paras who would say like a one-on-one, that would be called out in a specific IEP. If you had a child that, needed some kind of specific assistance from a particular adult. Obviously, on a day that that particular child were in school, the para would be assigned and working directly with that student. On the days that they're remote, that para might be somehow remotely helping facilitate that student. That para could also be, an extra body in the classroom. Again, we talked about like kind of helping the teacher monitor the students who are remote, if there were any kind of issues as far as communicating back and forth. One of the children online has a question, wants to interject into the classroom. I could see the para helping facilitate that.
And I have a follow-up. So that being said, the para seem pretty important to the plan. Is every classroom getting a para? Or is it going to be like a pool model? Like, what's the para count going to be?
Yeah, I mean, it's really model dependent. In the hybrid model, the paras are obviously crucial to be in the buildings, that second adult in the classroom, helping with that facilitation of the instruction piece. It's a little bit different if we go fully remote. We are going to have to have a discussion about that, because there are some paras certainly that are needed to facilitate some of the IEP type work. But if we are fully remote as well, we may not necessarily, there are some groups of employees that we may not need as many of. So we are going to have to discuss that.
So, in this middle school schedule,
That's elementary.
I'm sorry, okay. Go back, because I'm thinking specialists, how we've been talking in the middle, in this school, this elementary level,
Yep.
and you said to me, teaming up and so on, said to all of us, teaming up and so on. Is that the same thought you have for middle school in terms of the world language teachers?
What if
Because
we
that
do-
is a specialist too?
It is. What if we do this? Can we just finish the elementary one if anyone has questions?
Sure.
And then we'll go back to the middle one?
Sure.
Okay.
Any other questions on the elementary school schedule? Okay. now we
Okay.
can go back.
We'll go back to the other one. So,
So when you go to,
at middle school here, you'll see, and Linda can speak to this, but like your world language
yeah,
and your specialists are on the back part of the day as well. So they would be free during the school day to be able to be paired up and be kind of team teaching with,
Same thing.
with the core teachers. Right, because the students are going home for lunch, and then they're participating remotely in the specials and the world language.
okay, so it is the team
It's
type
kind
of
of the same.
concept
The
again.
timing is a little different, but it's the same concept.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that was a long question, so I'll go back to Donna. Do you have questions?
Oh, yeah.
On that, a question?
I want to go back to something, I believe it was Maria that brought it up. If we have a student in a classroom that tests positive, that group will pivot into a remote situation, correct? So this could be going on all year long, where people have signed up for hybrid, and a couple weeks in, now they're on remote for a couple weeks, and then back to hybrid, and then someone else tests positive, and they could pivot back out to remote again. Is that correct?
It could happen. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole protocol that's basically gonna dictate if a child in a classroom or a teacher in a class, staff member in the classroom, does test positive, then this is the protocol. And I'm just talking like in quick generic terms, but like that class will be going remote for 2 weeks. Again, if the teacher is able to continue teaching remotely, that'll just shift to remotely. We'll have to figure out, at what level, at what point in time after people have quarantined and tested and come back negative, can we consider bringing that group back in person? So yes, so that is kind of that flexibility, but that's why I think it's important to know ahead of time, like what your remote, what your hybrid options are gonna be, so that you can have that transition.
Well, I think it's really important that parents understand this, because, we've had a lot of concern from parents that if we go remote, that it might interfere, for example, with their work schedules. But this constant moving in and out, well, I shouldn't say constant, because hopefully we won't,
Right.
could also pose a problem for parents.
It absolutely could.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, this is gonna be a flex year for everyone. We could have the best intentions and go back in some type of in-person learning, and we could have an incident in a particular classroom. There could be an uptick in the community, and we have to either shift that classroom or the district into fully remote. For how long, I don't know, but we would assess and then figure out when it was safe to all go back. But there is gonna be some play, and it's not like we're gonna have forewarning. So,
Right.
If a situation develops on a Tuesday, and a child, tests positive, at that point, we're notifying the students and the families of that particular class, and like, they're not coming back for 2 weeks. So
Right.
you would very quickly need to have some backup daycare plans.
Just ask one more, yeah.
Sure, thank you. With regards to a possible reduction in our workforce, if we're pivoting constantly back and forth between these plans, let's say, we start remote and then we move into hybrid, won't we need those people if we go back into the hybrid model, you know, that we may have let go because we didn't need them in the remote model?
Yeah, it's possible. And I think, you know, that's a discussion we're gonna have to have. I think, you know, if we start in the hybrid model, then obviously those staff positions and maybe even more, we're gonna need for programming. I guess my concern would be if we start right out of the gate in the fully remote model, and there's no, you know, clear indication of when or how we would go back. I don't think that's something that we can just let go through the school year and remain fully staffed without knowing. So it's an unfortunate situation, but we would have to take a look at, you know, cutting some staff, quite honestly. And then if the conditions prevailed and the committee was comfortable at that point in time of going back, we would have to, you know, reach out and rehire. But, yeah, I mean, again, if we're in the hybrid mode, I think you need that flexibility. But if you do just start out in fully remote, I think, again, without the indication of when you would be going back, that was the discussion we would have to have.
Well, to your point, we could end up in remote 2 weeks into the school year.
You could, and I think you'd have to take a look at your staffing model at that point.
Okay, Jeff, question? Or not? You don't have to ask a question? You could pass?
We can come back to you.
Take it.
You wanna come back to
Yeah,
you?
you pass?
All right, so let's imagine this meeting, except we're teaching 8 or 10 kids with somebody on remote with chat questions. I mean, how really manageable is this for the teacher? Because if you were trying to run this meeting, and I've seen how some of these, and we've gotten better at it, and I'm sure teachers would get better at it too, but how are they supposed to manage 8 or 10 remote students and the students in front of them and be able to answer questions and do all the things that teachers do with 2 separate audiences? How do we know the remote kids in a hybrid model are getting the same kind of attention? Like,
I mean, you have that, you have it similar to what you were saying, could project them up on the board, they can be there, kids can participate online at the same time.
but we're
as the-
expecting the teacher to pay attention to the laptop.
Well, but I think that's what we're talking about, like, say, like the para, the second adult in the classroom, is gonna be critical, because they're going to be, the teacher can be focusing on the 8 kids in front of them and doing the instruction. The kids from home are watching the instruction.
Okay,
And
alright.
let's say it was a para, you know, could say, you know what, John has a question, he has his hand up. They'll have to figure out a routine as to signal that they, you know, have a question. And I see the second adult in the classroom kind of being that facilitator.
Okay,
So that, it is, and this is gonna be very difficult, no matter what model we implement,
Yep.
it's gonna be tough. But I think that's when that second adult is so important.
Remember too, they used to having 24 kids in front of them.
no, I get it. I think,
And I usually put them in groups, like as a teacher, I'd be putting them in groups. So say you were remote and you happen to be in Joanna's group, I can tell you right now, Joanna would be like,
You can use-
John's trying to say something.
are you gonna have the ability to do breakout rooms? Are you gonna continue, I don't know if GoToMeeting has it. I know like Zoom
Well,
has it.
they use Google, so you can.
Oh, Google Classroom, that's right. The second question, and then I'll move on.
It's okay, John.
So we've talked a lot about K through 12. Can we talk about CHIPS? Because there are a lot of people coming into the school system that are going to go through CHIPS. And, I mean, Lions Pride isn't really our, you know, us, but I'm sure this is all going to affect them. So what's the discussion about CHIPS? Are we even, I mean, just what, yeah, what?
Yeah, again, a lot of this is gonna be dependent on decisions we make. CHIPS is an extension, and I really consider Lions Pride and ComEd an extension of the
Me
school
too,
department.
me too, everybody
But,
does.
you know, CHIPS programming is a critical component of the district. I consider, you know, the CHIPS students who are on IEPs, you know, a special population. Regardless of the model you pick, you know, if you do select, say, the fully remote only, you know, there's a question about what do you do with the kind of high needs populations. You know, do you prioritize to bring some of those populations back in person? There's arguments on both sides. How do you do it for one if it's safe? How do you, you know, do it for another if it's not? So that's another discussion we would have to have. The students in CHIPS who are on IEPs, you know, would receive services and programming. We'd have to figure out what that looks like.
Okay.
I don't know necessarily if we're trying to limit our numbers. What we may do is not have the kind of the general ed or the role model students be part of that program. It may be more of a service program for the year if we're trying to keep our numbers down. But we would be taking a look at that. But there would be some programming for CHIPS.
Right. Okay, I want to make sure, it's one of the concerns that comes up, so.
Yeah.
All right, do not kill me. I'm back to technology. To me, neither model can work without us knowing for certain that these students are going to have access to technology and basically in a one-to-one type of model, because you can't be touching a million and one things and so on. I know that you reached out to Bill at one time, because I know I've asked this during several meetings. And that, I think taking things off carts and so on, that there was that possibility. I think whatever we do, I strongly urge us to require that each student, if a family has 3 kids, 3 devices, because it just became extremely difficult for people during the year to be able to manage. And then in addition to devices, if you could also talk a bit about what's happening with programs that we have to have access to, like, for example, Zoom, extra meeting rooms or whatever. I don't know if there's cost involved in that. And cameras and so on, any of those things, the actual technologies that are needed in order to do this.
Sure.
Okay? If you could just talk to that a bit, so that we're pretty sure that whatever model we do go with initially, it's a hybrid. Day one, child comes in, gets assigned a device and stays with that device. Agreement is signed about the device, and that's it. How are we envisioning this?
So a couple things for you. I do not have any concerns when it comes to like software products or any of that stuff that we use that's license-based. We've already built that into our budget. We would be using the same products and programs in person, remotely, or hybrid. So I really don't have any issues with that. We've talked about the device issue in the past. Last spring, when we had to go out kind of quickly, we didn't know if we were going to be coming back to school. So when we went out in March, there was a question about whether we were going to be out until April vacation. If we were going to come back, then that didn't happen. We might come back in May. That didn't happen. So we didn't want to really break down all of the carts, because technically those are our testing carts. So if we happen to have come back after April vacation and we still move forward with MCAS, those computers were already configured to basically implement MCAS at the time. So we didn't want to break them down. At this point in time, whether we go back fully or we have the hybrid option, we're going to have to break down the carts that we have to make computers available to students who need them. Our goal would absolutely be so that every student can have access to a device. We don't have a device for every single student at this point. There are some students that have their own device, so they may not need a device from us. But we would basically break down all of the available carts that we have. We have already received, and we're going to start implementing over the next 2 weeks, the new computers for the 5th and 9th grade students. So we know grades 5 to 12, half of the students have a district-issued device. They're fine. Between the high school and the middle schools and the elementary schools, when we break down the rest of the carts, we're close to having a device per student. As an aside, Bill did write a grant for us that is pending. But if, once it gets announced and once it gets approved, it's basically a matching grant. So we put in for about $250,000. That would be matched with another $250,000. I've talked to Town Manager Cohen about this. We would use the CARES Act money as the match for that grant. So that $500,000 could go toward a Chromebook purchase. So I've asked him to go ahead and make that purchase. So that's about 2,000 Chromebooks additional, aside from the one-on-one initiative that we have. That could come to us grant funded. So at that point, certainly, there'd be enough devices. The issue that we're struggling with, but every single school district in the state is trying to physically get your hand on the equipment at this point. Again, we did kind of pre-authorize the order. The order is in. We're just waiting for this grant funding. And, at some point, and when I have a definitive date for you, I'll certainly let you know. But, I mean, that would be the goal. Now, that would be totally outside of the one-on-one initiative we have, because I don't want to mix funding streams. We can support the one-on-one initiative by every year basically paying for that 25%. The leasing model we have going, that's going great. These new computers would be used for this issue. When it was done, we would bring them back and basically use those to replace the cart devices that we give out to students first. So we basically replenish our carts before we have the excess. But when I have a definitive date, I'll let you know. I think we are really in good shape that if people need, and even multiple devices per family, that we'll have something for them to get started if they need it. If there are students that already do have their own device and they don't need one, obviously if they don't need to take one, that's going to be helpful to us. But I think we're in a far better shape now than we were last fall.
Okay.
And I have no concerns as far as, again, software or anything like that, any of the support programs.
Very comprehensive answer. One more question on technology.
Sure.
And that is, are we envisioning that teachers will be teaching in a classroom every single day? Is that a requirement for staff, or can they opt, if they're in the remote model, let's say, to be teaching from home, and they're going to be given the equipment, is that right, that they need in order to do the live type of teaching?
Yeah, I mean, teachers are actually in a pretty good place equipment-wise. We refresh equipment and we provide teacher equipment pretty regularly. But if teachers need devices or whatnot, they certainly will have access to them. That
Okay.
won't be an issue. You know, the question about the preferred method or where teachers should teach from is going to be ongoing discussion. I'll tell you now, I feel that we can best support teachers in the schools. Obviously, if we were in a fully remote scenario, I would like to see the staff be in their rooms working with us, teaching, because they would have access to all of their technology, they would have access to all of their materials. We can best support them on our environment. They would also have access to colleagues. So I think that would be optimal. I do see us in a situation, and again, there aren't any kids around at that point in time too, so that should really reduce the concern about any kind of spread if there was one. What we are going to have to think through is in a situation where we have the hybrid model going and we have some programming taking place in the building with staff and students. If we do have staff who really can't be in that kind of an environment, they may be in a situation where they're teaching completely remotely, and we would have to figure out how to best support them. The technology itself won't be an issue. I'm certain we'll be able to get them the technology to use. You know, they wouldn't have access to, say, those boards that we talked about. And I think the only issue we had this past spring was, you know, if people are working from home, then they're really reliant on their own internet connection to basically be connecting to kids and whatnot, and sometimes those aren't always the best. So, you know, you can experience some downtime and things like that. But, you know, it's even going to happen on our environment. I think it's going to happen a little less frequently, but that is an issue.
Okay, thank you.
All right, can you just address some of the safety protocols? I know a lot of this in the facility reports. You mentioned, you know, hallways and stairwells, ventilation, PPE. Is there going to be hand washing stations, hand sanitizer in the classrooms?
Yep.
What is the cleaning protocols in between classes? You know, in those Wednesdays, if we're in the hybrid model, a lot of stuff there.
That's a big one. Let me kind of do it globally,
Yep.
and then if you think there's an area I missed or you need me to come back, just ask me. But the facilities working group did a lot of work walking our individual facilities, taking a look at what we have a need to make for a safe return to school. So facilities and Brian Curley's group in particular were basically charged with the procurement of all of our PPEs. So I think we're actually in very good shape as far as that's concerned. Masks, and we're kind of stockpiling stuff at this point. I think we have a 3+ month supply of materials, certainly to get us started for the school year. But, masks for adults, they're physically in the back of the room. So, those we have. Our student masks have been ordered. They should be in within the week to 10 days. That was one item that's outstanding at this point.
Okay.
When it comes, there's all kinds of different special things you need for the nurses. So, we have plenty of gloves, but nurses also use a special kind of glove. So, they have those special gloves. There's, gowns that our nursing staff would use, but even some of our special educators, if you're working with a kind of a high needs population or a high risk population for spread, they would have, say, gowns or gloves. Face shields are also, we have some, but that is something that's escaping a lot of districts. There's a high demand for the face shields, so that's something that we're in the process of procuring. But I really don't have any issue. Oh, you mentioned hand sanitizer too. We're sitting on plenty of hand sanitizer. Cleaning product, we have more than enough to get us going for months. Our vendors are actually kind of warehousing extra product for us. We've already paid for it. It's sitting there at ready. We don't physically have the space to store it all in the district. We've bought those cleaning machines you might have seen. People kind of almost looks like a backpack. Goes around. It's like a fogger that has a particular chemical, electrolyte chemical that you spray on a surface, and it kills any kind of germs, things along those lines. So we have several of those in the district. We've ordered more so that we can have multiple per school. In the event that one ever broke, we wouldn't have to run around to a different building and bring it through. Our own, when it comes to cleaning, our own custodians are obviously in the buildings during the day. We have the nighttime cleaning crew that will do the regular cleaning every night. We have asked each of the cleaners to provide us an additional proposal to basically come in during the school day and supplement our staff, because we only have one custodian, to provide some extra support so that we can do the extra cleaning of, the doorknobs and the railings and the bathrooms and things along those lines, as well as the Wednesday when the buildings are completely empty, coming in to do a top to bottom, kind of that deep cleaning. So I can share with you like what the actual kind of cleaning protocol would be for each of the spaces. But, he assures me we're actually in very good shape on the PPE orders, on the physical things itself. A few people did ask me about the maintenance report. There were a couple of items in there that said, when available and things like that. So that's language that actually comes right from the DOE or DESE or DPH guidelines, when available. And when you have the ability to do it, they say to do it. One example is the particular higher grade filter that they were recommending for HVAC systems. So when it's available, when you can install it, they recommend installing it. So we have several HVAC systems in the district that we can upgrade to that particular, the name escapes me, but it's a particular higher level filter that we can install in the systems, and we've done so. But there were also HVAC units in our buildings that just physically can't function with them. So, what we have done is obviously we'll put in the higher caliber regular filter, and what we'll do is change that up more frequently than we normally would. But if you actually installed one of those other filters, it's a particular level filter, the engine power in the HVAC system isn't sufficient enough to actually go through that particular filter, and you're going to actually get less efficiency and less purification, if you want to think of it that way, by running the system. The issue becomes, that's the case now, that's the case in 6 months, and that's the case in a year, because we're not changing out the HVAC systems in all of our buildings, and this isn't unique to Chelmsford. I mean, this is school systems and hospitals and buildings, but that's the thing, when you can install that, to go ahead and do that. There was another recommendation about like humidity levels within classrooms, and when you can, to try to keep them within particular limits. So in a situation like that, when you're in an air-conditioned building, it's obviously much easier to control humidity levels. So if you're at Center, which is largely air-conditioned, they're going to be able to reach those set points. If you're at Harrington or South Row or Byham, and they don't have air conditioning units, obviously you can't regulate the humidity. So it was a recommendation that when you can, you should do that. We certainly would. McCarthy Middle School is an example. We have HVAC and air conditioning in the library. So we would obviously regulate that particular area to hit those targets, but we don't have air conditioning in regular classrooms. So there's no way to...
Except the pods.
Well, except the pods, right. But like a regular classroom in the front of the building, there's no way to regulate the humidity in those rooms because we don't have air conditioning. But, to say not utilize those rooms or not go back because of that, it's not like in 6 months we're going to have that ability, or a year from now. We're not adding air conditioning to the buildings, so that's just not a possibility. So that was most of because that did get mentioned to me. That was where that came from. It was basically the DESE and DPH recommendations that whenever you can do this, to do that. And we certainly would. And in any situation where we can do it, we have.
Anybody else have questions on safety?
On safety.
Do you want to go around the horn?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay.
Donna, anything on safety?
Okay, so in the facilities report under restrooms, it said, it's recommendations for each space to be single-use, but this may not be feasible or manageable. There's no way for teaching staff to be aware of students from other rooms are also receiving restroom passes. So we'd have to determine whether or not the bathrooms will be single-use. If not, how to space out the things inside, time constraints on students leaving class. The building code prevents us from making all of the restrooms unisex. And then we have to determine what the frequency of monitoring these are and disinfecting. So do we have a plan for?
Yeah, and what that is basically saying is, like, we don't have single-stall bathrooms in most schools don't. So you have like multi-stall bathrooms for men's and ladies' rooms and boys and girls' rooms. So like if you go to a mall or you go to a restaurant, these days, if you go up to the counter to wash your hands, and let's say there's 4 sinks, you might see that 2 of the sinks are actually covered, or they have like a covering on them. Alternating stalls might be like locked or closed off. We would have to do a similar thing. So yeah, so that would all be done. I think in addition to that, schools will come up with some kind of probably a color coding type system to basically show if someone's in the bathroom or outside the bathroom. That's when we may, in the in-person model, actually have if we have staff availability, we might be able to utilize staff to be able to help with coordination. Keeping an eye on how many kids are coming and going from the bathrooms, and really, in the education piece, setting the expectations about, what is proper use in the bathroom and social behavior and things along those lines.
Jeff, question on safety?
I was on the facilities committee.
Oh, yeah, jump in if I missed anything.
And I know that where there wasn't water stations, Nancy was getting us water stations for hand washing. The foggers, it's a special chemical, it cleans like in 15 seconds. I think and I could be wrong, but with smaller classes, I think it'll be easier for teachers to control some of these situations. The important thing is just cooperation of everyone involved. And I think that's the key to, this plan completely, that people, it's not a question, but I think the key thing is there has to be buy-in from everyone for this to work.
Right.
John, safety questions?
Yeah, so, we talked about nurses a little bit. So I mean, I know this is but one of the things you mentioned specifically to safety was, the nurses were supposed to have isolation rooms. Do we have isolation rooms in all the schools? Or are we just gonna have to figure it out?
No, that was, and Jeff, if you want to even just mention how you did that, but that was actually part of the work of the working groups, going around to the different schools and identifying what those isolation rooms would be.
Okay. So they're
I'm
all
not
like
trying to
big-
put you on the spot, but I know
trust
that,
Jeff,
yeah, I know that was done.
We do have them everywhere.
I think that's all I had on school safety. I have other questions, but
Okay,
I'll let
for
Mary go.
nurses, let's say that a nurse tests positive and the nurse is out. And the nurse has come in contact with many people and so on, but let's just say, do we have subs for nurses? I know that this is a position that's very difficult to fill in our schools on a regular basis.
Right.
What's the situation for us right now for that?
Yeah, so I mean, nursing subs is always difficult.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit hopeful, will we increase the day-to-day sub rate, that we're gonna be a little bit more attractive. But again, these aren't normal circumstances. We do have some schools that have multiple nurses, so it could be a situation where if a nurse is sick or if a nurse does need to quarantine, we may have to pull one of the extra nurses from another building so that we at least have a baseline nurse in each building. But we will try to utilize the sub pool as much as possible first. I think that would be like a last resort if we had to do that.
Okay, and we have the PPE for the nurses where they can have the gowns and all of that stuff
Yeah,
lined up?
either on hand or in process.
That's
So,
all lined up?
Yes.
As we were talking about all of this safety stuff, it just really, I could envision that a young child in elementary school whose teacher looks like a doctor in a hospital ward. So, in terms of safety, are we thinking we're going to prepare these children for what they're going to see that's quite different from, what they've got in a regular basis in school?
Yeah, I think that's gonna be part of the messaging.
Yeah.
Going back to school, almost like a social story you might create with students around a situation that might happen in a classroom or something that they're gonna experience. But no, we would actually have to, in our promotional materials about going back to school, again, this is what the bus is gonna look like, because everyone is gonna have masks on the bus. This is what it's gonna look like when you get to the school. This is how you're gonna disembark from the bus. This is how you're gonna enter the school. yes, they're gonna have to be, kind of trained on, what this is all gonna look like, because we don't want to scare anyone, you know,
Right,
when
that would
they,
be-
when
that would
they
be
come back to
interesting,
school.
right? Okay, thank you.
Any other safety questions, Donna? Yeah.
It said that we needed to establish best, this is in the facilities report, excuse me, we need to establish the best practice for setting up mandatory hand sanitizer stations in each room. Has that been done?
Yeah, I mean, that's largely the work of the, what do you call it? The hand sanitizer
Yeah.
itself, yes.
Okay. And then,
The issue is, just on that,
Yep.
the issue is really just more around, how much sanitizer to have in rooms. But yet we're, like I said, we have an abundance of that. I'm not concerned about, shortfall. It's how much we should actually start in each room with, and then get into a replacement cycle.
okay. And then, in another part of the facilities report, I know that it was deemed maybe not feasible to have the plexiglass around the teachers' desks, but there was a recommendation for plexiglass for in play areas. Are we going to be doing something like that at the elementary level?
In play areas?
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe it was in the, hang on, maybe it was in the hybrid report.
Preschool?
Like playgrounds or in the classroom?
No, I'm sorry, I'll have to, I know that it was,
Like, we're not gonna have stations set up at the elementary level where they might have like a, you know, a kitchen set or something. The students will definitely be in a different model. We wouldn't have them going around like that.
I was thinking more at a table. On page 9 of the district-wide hybrid plan, under elementary specific, it says plexiglass for play, groups, and learning. Will we be doing that in the classrooms?
Is that on your report?
It did say that.
On the one that I gave you on the facilities report.
It's in here.
It's in the hybrid plan report.
The kids, I mean, the kids would not be, I can look at that for you. The kids would not be doing playgroups, like they similarly would.
Just like the considerations that if we did that, we would have to have it. I don't think it was like a we have to do it. That wouldn't be facilities piece.
Yeah, I knew
Yeah, I
that,
think it was just like if you wanted to have it, you would have to have like a plexiglass thing. The problem with the plexiglass, because a lot of people have talked about, like, could you put that around there? It's just another surface space that can get more infected, because that has to be disinfected, so that was not probably
Yep.
gonna be feasible.
I've heard a lot about like surface cleaning. I mean, it's airborne, right? I mean, and people are wearing so why would you not put a shield between two people? Even though you have to clean it
Mascot.
after.
No, I believe Donna was talking about like, say like a kid's play set in an elementary classroom. Like,
I don't know, she brought up the screens, and then I just heard a lot of people talk about we have to clean the surfaces and surfaces. I get it. You have to clean that after, but it's better than to have something in between you. You can't go to a Dunkin' Donuts now without talking through plexiglass. I mean,
Okay.
I don't understand the question.
so the point is not the plexiglass. You keep talking about surfaces, but this is like an airborne thing. So I just don't understand why you wouldn't put,
But if somebody were to sneeze, that surface would need to be cleaned.
well, it's better than coming through the mask and hitting somebody.
no, I hear you, but I think if you have, like, if you didn't have a mask on, I think that would be,
About 6
I
feet
mean, this
apart.
still releases, it
We're
just,
not planning on putting kids not less than 6 feet apart too, so they wouldn't necessarily,
well, you brought up the plexiglass and then cleaning the surface of the plexiglass, so I'm just curious what that
It's in
means.
here somewhere. I've seen the plexiglass thing. I think the
Yeah.
envision,
it's
when I read it.
page 9 of the hybrid, under elementary specific.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if there
Okay.
was any,
no, I mean,
talk about using that for.
no, I don't see us, in that kind of a scenario with the kids sharing those kind of devices. So I don't think that's, an issue. I will tell you, I just was checking my email real quick, but on the classroom hand sanitizer, that was what you were previously alluding to.
Yeah, it was actually in the facilities report.
Yeah, that one is all set. The fire department has actually,
Okay.
signed off on that.
Excellent.
And, stock-wise, we have plenty.
Okay, great.
Other safety questions? Donna?
I have other questions not related to
Yeah,
safety.
right, we'll come back around.
So I think that anybody that spent a lot of time in classrooms without the air conditioning know that they can get pretty hot.
Yep.
And I think it's going to become even more uncomfortable when you've got the mask on. What plans do we have, you know, if the heat index reaches a certain point to be able to move the kids to a different setting, excuse me, In addition to that, I'm also concerned about hydration because, you know, I don't think we want kids taking their masks on and off to drink. So when we reach a certain point, you know, the heat index gets to a certain point, what is our plan for being able to relocate students to some place that may be, you know, more appropriate, cooler and comfortable?
Again, like, I don't have a response for every single, like, scenario that could come up. I'll tell you, you know, if I were hot and I was in one of the classrooms, and it was a nice day outside, you know, I might consider taking my classroom outside, and like they do, you know, now you might see it,
Right.
like, make sure the kids are socially distanced apart and do like an outside lesson. We do have a lot of schools that actually do have some, you know, shade, and I think teachers already do that, so I could see that happening. I mean, if we hit, you know, some kind of, if we got back into school and this were an issue, and we hit some kind of, you know, crazy heat wave, and, you know, the dehydration was an issue, and the people were having mask issues, it would almost be like a reverse snow day. I mean, there's nothing to stop us at that point in time and saying, you know, hey, we're experiencing some difficulty here, you know, for whatever reason, we're gonna need to take a couple days off, and we already have the setup for remote, so, you know, be on notice Friday, it's gonna be 110 degrees, we're gonna have Friday be a remote day. I mean, there'd be nothing stopping us from doing that, but I think without knowing exactly, again, like weather-wise and
Sure.
things like that, you know, we wouldn't have like an actual, like a protocol outside of, say, like a reverse snow day.
Wow.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Question on safety?
On the
Safety, yeah.
the safety
Yeah,
part, it's too difficult to think of every single possible safety question, because at some point, we're gonna have to take some risk. But I think from what I'm getting, from the questions that people are asking and so on, it's to know for certain that these safety precautions are in place, that if people don't follow them, first of all, we have to set them up right. But then if people aren't following them, that they're going to not be allowed to be part of the cohort that goes in person, because otherwise then it's not fair to those who want to be there in person and who are following all the rules. On the safety question regarding heat, and you can go ahead and comment, but it might be for us to consider that we live in a part of the country where pretty soon it's not gonna be that hot. Middle of September is what we're looking at now for students to return. Teachers have to put up with the heat for at least a couple of weeks, probably in the buildings. So to think maybe in terms of that and when to physically return kids if it's too difficult to do it with the masks on and so on, that's a consideration, I think, for us to
I
think
mean,
about.
That is kind of weather-related too. Like, we'll have to just assess and see where we're at weather-wise, but as you
Yeah.
indicate, you know, usually it's the late August, early September days when you're going back that it's an issue. And as you get closer to like Columbus Day weekend, you know, typically the heat's not as bad. So we would just have to be conscious of that and watch it. I'll just tell you on your first kind of concern about, you know, if a child is in the classroom and they're not complying. You know, when we set up these regulations, basically, that, you know, you're going to socially distance, you're going to have a mask on, things like this. And I would have no problem if a child is not conforming to doing that, or, you know, for what, obviously there'd have to be a procedure to go through, like a just cause type procedure. But I would have no problem excluding that child and saying, you know what, you need to be in the remote program. So that could be very much baked into our expectations model that, you know, parents are going to be expected to adhere to, because I wouldn't want to compromise the safety of a whole class over a particular child, let's say, that wasn't able to comply with what the directions for the class were. So we could be very clear about that in the kind of the code of conduct. I see us actually kind of amending our code of conducts because these are some new things we're going to be dealing with before we get the kids back into school. But I would have no problem with that whatsoever.
Okay.
Any other safety questions? I think the safety question was mine, so Donna, do you have other questions? No. Jeff, any other questions?
I mean, I'm sorry, any other safety questions?
No, any other questions? We're done with safety.
I already asked my question, so it's actually
All right.
Jeff's turn.
Really good defer, okay.
If there aren't enough paras to help out in a classroom, when you're doing remote and in class, are we going to hire more individuals to help? Because, we talked about, so I'm teaching my class, as John had mentioned, and there are students remotely. We talked about having paras monitor, I guess, the remote class. Will we have everything covered, or?
Well, that's what we have to get to. So, I mean, part of our reason for questioning the staff, the questionnaire, is to figure out if people are going to have any difficulty coming back to the workplace. So we need to kind of get through that data. Based on my just initial feeling of looking at the numbers, I think if we went back in a hybrid model, we would have sufficient staff to be able to basically pair up adults in a classroom so that you would have that between our additional teaching staff and paraprofessional support. If it ever got to the point where we needed to hire a few extra staff members, I have no problem coming to you and saying we should do that. We could access our COVID money, we could access CARES money from the town. We would not open or operate a class that wasn't properly staffed, so that would absolutely happen. I think the other group that, we employ about 50 to 60 lunch and recess aides that, technically we're not doing lunch and recess during the school year. So that could potentially also be a group that might be interested in, because the service for the lunch and recess isn't going to be there. They might be interested in serving more of a para or a support role in situations to be able to help with those numbers. So there's some flexibility on the staffing front. I actually feel pretty good knowing on the data that, a third of parents wanted to go fully remote right out of the gate. I think we could accommodate those 2/3 of parents that wanted the at least partial in-person option with the staffing that we have.
Can I just, one more? What if that number jumps when we go hybrid?
The people that want to go out,
That want to go out. Let's say we go hybrid, and that's what we agreed to tonight. And what if, because it was non-binding before when it was a third,
right?
if that were to jump, would that change anything?
It wouldn't change a lot, and again, this is off the top of my head.
Right, yeah.
It wouldn't change a lot if people went from hybrid to remote. We would have to reassess our numbers, obviously, if more people then wanted to go in person than remote. But we also, at that point too, have to be able to kind of work through with our staff of, which staff and like who has needs, can we accommodate them, how can we accommodate them, and see how that all kind of lines up. So I don't think it would be an issue if more people picked remote. We would just have to be more careful about people wanting more of the in-person. But again, you're still going to have that group that's going to go remote. And I think in that situation where you have the 24 kids in a class, that's actually on the high end for us. So, if you did have, instead of 8 kids going full remote, you had, 5, you're still only having 9 kids in the classroom in front of the teacher. Your numbers aren't going to be thrown off that much, that I think it would be workable. And again, we're exceeding that, meeting or exceeding that 6-foot standard.
Right.
The difference between, again, 8 and 9 students in a class isn't significant spatially. When those rooms could accommodate 14 or 15 if we really wanted to push it, but we don't want to push it. And I think that, in the end, if it's 7 to 9 kids in a classroom with supported by a teacher and that para assistant helping with the online piece, I think it's manageable.
Thank you.
John, question?
All right, so one of the things that was mentioned in the, in one of the documents was significant costs related to the hybrid model. What are those costs?
It was in the facilities report.
Oh, well, I think, whatever type of, but that's just any kind of in-person, whether a full in-person hybrid or even under the full remote, if we go hybrid, like the PPE cost is expensive. Like, so when you're buying masks and shields and gowns and things like that, there's a cost to that. Now, we have some local funding. We've also used the FEMA money, like for all the upfront stuff, the 3-month supply. That's all actually been charged to the town FEMA account, so that hasn't been a direct hit to us. The state is also making available, is it $225 per kid? $225 per student to, as a special grant for us to be able to buy, say, PPE and things like that. So that's a little over $1.1 million that we actually have available to us. I think the report was just trying to flag that there is an expense to any kind of in-person operation. It's not going to overly negatively impact our budget, if that's the
That's kind of
concern.
where I'm.
No, it's just that there is a significant cost when it comes to PPE procurement. If we ever did find ourselves in a situation where we had to add a couple of extra paras or a couple of extra teachers, there is a cost to that as well. But as we've gone through the finances, I mean, we're in strong, financial shape now. We haven't flagged that $1.1 million in the PPE grant. We also have our own kind of COVID grant that's $300,000 to $400,000 that we haven't earmarked for anything.
Okay.
That's kind of discretionary to the school committee at this point, and we can flag that for any of these needs that might come up. And this is all before any kind of an additional stimulus package comes from the federal government. There still is hope that the federal government is going to help the municipalities in the state level. So we are still kind of waiting for that to happen. I still feel relatively good that we will benefit Chelmsford in general, but we will benefit as a beneficiary of some additional funding coming from the state. It's just a matter of time and when that legislation is going to pass.
Okay, and then just one more. It's a two-parter. How many teachers approximately do we have in the district, just roughly?
Something like 302.
Yeah, it's like 400 and something total, that's what the paras.
300-ish
Teachers?
teachers.
Well, teachers and nurses is closer to maybe 420.
Yeah.
Oh, they all lumped into that same group together? So the whole bargaining unit?
Yeah.
Okay. In my mind, I had them broken out differently.
So I just needed a rough number, that's fine.
Was that 428?
Around
420.
420-ish.
ish.
That's
Um,
unit A.
Yeah, Unity.
Well, so the reason I'm asking,
Nurses and,
it includes everybody, yeah.
Yeah. Not the paras and secretaries, though.
A pretty large, so on the union survey, which I think we've all read, so a pretty large number, I think almost half, said that they may not be willing to return.
We get a union survey?
I don't have a union
I did not
survey.
see
No,
the union
the union had surveyed on their own. They had
Yep.
surveyed the membership
seen them
to
both,
see
yep.
if people were concerned about this, whatever. I think in the email that the president sent us, about 100 members had indicated that they had some concern about coming back, whether it was their own health, caring for a family member, or like childcare issues that they may have. But that 100-ish people is, because that's not only just Unit A, that's also the paras, the recess aides and everything. That's got to be closer to like 800, would you guess?
Yes.
About 800 people, I would say, is in that grouping.
Okay, so the teachers that don't want to return, or any
Well,
employee.
I'm just trying to say that 100 wasn't purely teachers.
No,
That
I
was the
understand
whole-
that. That's not my question. So the people that aren't willing to return, are we making accommodations for them to help with remote learning or
Well, yeah.
can't return?
So that's part of the process we're going through now. So aside from like the union survey, the personnel working group basically put together, and Cheryl in our HR office, a questionnaire for staff for them to flag for us, with their name, so it's not anonymous. If you have some type of a health issue, or you care for someone you feel like you're in a high-risk needs, who you don't feel comfortable coming back to work, or you don't feel you can, there's a whole process that we have to go through to kind of vet that, certify it, figure out what accommodation we might be able to make for that. So that's all kind of ongoing at this point. Percentage-wise, just in ballpark numbers, it's actually significantly less than the students. So that was actually interesting. So what we would try to do in a perfect world is once our students locked into, if you did do the hybrid model, once they lock into which they want, we would basically take a look at our staffing and figure out to kind of operate that parallel track. Do we have the appropriately licensed staff who want to and need to stay remote to basically put cohorts together to support the learning for the remote-only kids, separate from the hybrid kids, and then utilize our existing staff to staff and the regular model.
Okay, that's kind of what I was asking.
Yeah.
I want to make sure there's accommodations for people that,
Well, no, that's what
if somebody has a legitimate concern about their health or catching COVID, I mean, it's
no,
not.
there is just a process to go through.
Yep.
But that's ongoing right now. At the same time, we're looking at all this other data.
Okay, so,
Okay, a question about, and we need clarification on this. The DESI guidelines say that K through grade 2, no masks, correct?
It's not, K through, it's 2 through 12
Who has to?
have to wear a mask.
K and 1 don't have to.
K and
K
1
through 1
K and
do
1
not have
technically
to.
do not have to.
Okay. Are we making face shields available to K through 1? If they can't wear masks?
To the kids?
Yep.
Well, yeah, there's two things, though. We as a community could actually say that we even want K-1 to wear the mask. So, I mean, like, that's something that we as a group could say, if we're gonna go back in person, that we want it to be everyone. But aside from that, I don't know, again, I don't know a lot of kids who aren't gonna wanna wear masks, because even out in public, you know, I personally see a lot of even the little kids are just kind of used to wearing the masks now. So we would encourage that. You know, we technically would have shields available if they wanted to wear them, but I think it would be more of probably a choice issue. If they're not wearing a mask, they're probably not thinking about wearing the face shield. We would have to do an education piece with the parents on that. But one thing that you could do is just basically say, you know, everyone in the building, you know, K through 12, it's a committee
Is
that you want to
required to
have wear a mask, so.
Okay.
And that doesn't have to be decided tonight, but that could be your.
So we can go above what DESI requires. We can't just go less than what DESI requires.
Yeah, it's almost like a law thing. You can always go more than, you just can't go
Okay.
less than.
Thank you.
Going to the special populations report, can you just describe like what it would look like for special ed students, ELL students in the two different models?
Do you want to talk a little bit about that, or would you like me to?
I think we're both gonna have to talk a little bit about it, because I've been assembling some of the other pieces. I mean, I know that they were talking about, two different methods of, you know, being able, if you're in hybrid, you could push in, obviously, during the classroom or during some of those times that we had designated in the schedule. When it comes to, remote, some students will need to come to school to receive some of their services if necessary, and that's usually your high needs group, students that are in specialized population programs that we have. So it wouldn't be for all students. It would have, the special ed department would have to actually go through their cases to see what's working, what isn't working, like who would need what. It's based on the student's IEP. So there is gonna be a little bit of in-school piece for some students, and then there's going to be others that wouldn't necessarily qualify for that would be happening during their regular schooling.
And in the hybrid, could some of those high-need students be in more than 2 days a week?
Yes.
Yeah, that was the recommendation, actually, in the,
DESI guidelines.
in the DESI guidelines. Like, for me, the hard part is, if we go fully remote, the hard part is trying to figure out, well, who do you still service in person? If it's, you know, because how do you say to a special ed teacher, let's say, you know, you need to come to work, but the regular ed teacher doesn't? Those are different discussions. I know, Donnie, we're probably having that discussion, right?
Yeah, it's,
But
yeah.
I
I'm
think
in that
that's gonna
boat,
be,
so,
that's
yeah,
gonna
it's a
be
good question.
a staffing issue. When it comes to, like, if we're in a hybrid and we were doing the 2 and 2, I think there's more opportunity there for, you know, if you were going 2 days a week, and again, your transportation's worked out, you're in a substantially separate program, would probably be the easiest way to think about it, then, yes, you would probably be off Wednesday, but you would also be put in the B group, so you'd be coming Thursday and Friday too. So you'd be getting advantage of the 4 days of instruction, as opposed to, you know, potentially, if you can, coming in for just a service. And that's a whole other kind of discussion based on what we do. But I think what you would prioritize are your substantially separate special ed programs. You would probably prioritize some of your L students based on level and need, so that they might come in for different opportunity. Again, it's a heck of a lot easier if they're there a couple of days a week to have them come on the alternating days and have additional services, as opposed to when you have the regular full remote program running, to have them kind of miss that program and then come to the site for services. That just presents another scheduling challenge. And it's almost like when you pull a student out of their regular core program to receive a service, you know, they're missing what's happening during the regular program.
Right, we'd still be doing the regular
and that
screenings
can be a
that we have to
challenge.
do for L students, IEP meetings, all of that would still be in place.
Anybody else have questions on that?
On,
Special populations?
I'm sorry, no.
John? Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if it's directly related to the report, but I have a couple of special education questions. So, special ed evaluations that were not completed last year because of the end of the school year, if they were any that weren't completed, are they gonna be finished this year? Are they gonna start new?
Yeah, they would have to finish the reporting. I don't know if anybody didn't have a,
I don't know if any haven't, but it's
yeah,
a
I was
question
gonna
that's
say,
come up.
I don't remember anybody not
I
receiving.
think it really just depends on where they were at the process
Yeah.
at the time that they went out.
Okay.
If, from what I understand, if families are willing to meet or even meet remotely, our process has gone on. Now, during the summer times, it's somewhat difficult to get like some of the assessments done, just because staff aren't always there. But I anticipate, no matter what happens in September, if people have IEPs that are kind of, or evals that are lingering out there, that they would be
Okay.
finished, as long as the family goes along with it in one way or the other, whether it's in person or is remote.
Okay.
I
And
mean,
then-
the meeting's done in person or it's done remotely.
Yeah, and they were doing that in the spring last year, based on people.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make
Yep.
sure.
Yep.
It's something that's come up. And then 504 plans? I mean-
504s would still be in
Similar,
place.
they're in effect, and their regular renewal cycle would be
Okay.
done. Again, just depending, some of your meetings might be remote. A lot of those 504s are pretty year-to-year, just renewal type things,
Okay.
so they can happen pretty easily renewed. If it's like a brand-new one, the school's just gonna have to work with the family.
Okay. All right.
Anything else in this particular area?
Just one thing, John, I know that the special education teachers in particular across the state had their work cut out for them last spring in terms of developing the temporary distance learning plans, then continuing on with the IEP meetings. And I know that Amy did a lot of work in this particular area with her staff. There were some bugs, obviously, but, I think that people worked incredibly hard, and I would imagine that as we go forward, that the process will be even smoother, including how do we test kids, who does it, where does it take place, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about the special groups? We talk a lot about special ed and so on. If you're an EL student and you're not part of special ed, which apparently about 20 to 25% of EL is also special ed. If you're not, and you need the extra help to come to school, and you need to get to school in those extra 2 days or whatever, is there a thought that we could possibly coordinate some kind of transportation? Because that is a huge problem for the EL group, is the lack of transportation to get to the physical facility.
I think, and again, nothing is definitive, but off the top of my head, if we were in a hybrid model, then the students would already be getting to school their 2 days a week. They'd already be receiving their instruction. What you would probably consider is whether they should also go the additional 2 days, whether they should be part of cohort A and B to be able to get the extra
I
learning
see.
done. If we end up in a fully remote model, you're probably looking at just service only, because those teachers are gonna be being utilized during the same blocks. So I don't know if it would really, schedules would match up to be able to have an L student just go to the school to receive a service. You're also, because I don't know if the schedule's gonna match up with the L teacher and what they might be doing as part of the remote learning. So we would have to look at that. It would obviously be easier to meet their service needs if they were at least in person,
Right.
partial time. And I think, again, the transportation could be overcome at this point, because we'd be at half capacity and a significant number of students only opting for remote.
I'm gonna make this comment because I received an email from an EL parent that just really, I've gotta thank this parent for sending it. It took him or her, I'll just say one of them, quite a while probably to put it together. And I just wanna commend them for sending it and asking the questions that they did. They're very concerned about the ability to get the technology. And I tried to address that to see if there was the one-to-one and so on. Already in the questioning, you assured, I think there was assurance here that you're gonna do your very best for that.
Yes.
To make sure of that, so, I just wanna let them know that, thank you for the question, and, the effort was wonderful.
Thank you.
All right, back around to Donna, if you have other questions.
So we've had a lot of questions about the hybrid plan, but in reality, we're gonna actually be having kids doing some type of remote learning for the majority of the week, correct? Whether it be synchronous or asynchronous, okay? So parents had a lot of concerns about, kind of what happened last spring. You have explained in the past that that was just a really a different scenario, right? We were
Right.
trying to do this as we were learning it, and so I guess my question would be, what's gonna be different about the remote process for this year as compared to last spring?
I'll give you the quick overview, and then if you want to go deeper, that's fine. I think last spring, when we left on Friday the 13th, you know, we basically had to take a couple of weeks to figure out where we were at, where we going back. You know, our focus at that point in time was really taking care of each other. When we had teachers re-engage with students, a lot of it was enrichment, just keeping the connections going, making sure people had, you know, access to food and, you know, mental health services, guidance services, things like that. We then switched into some new learning content, but it took a little bit of time to get there. And we also didn't know, were we going to be out for 6 weeks? Were we going to be out for 16 weeks? We didn't know what was happening at that point in time. We know now, you know, again, whether we start the year in hybrid or we start the year in full remote, that there are likely going to be times during this year where we are full remote. And, you know, God forbid, you know, I mean, let's say we started fully remote and we're fully remote for the whole year. You know, we don't have the opportunity to come back in. It can't be a lost schooling year for students. So one of the two primary points that came out of that parent survey that we did a few weeks ago was that one, they crave schedule. So to John's point earlier, like one of the parent feedback pieces, it was very difficult managing particularly multiple kids within a home. And because again, everyone was trying their best, but at that point in time too, you know, we had our own staff that had, you know, their childcare issues and their kids were home, and we were just trying to put it together. But I think we all realized that it has to be more systematic and it has to be more scheduled. And the second piece that came across the survey was that our students really craved that contact. They wanted to see their teacher. If they couldn't be in person, they wanted to see the face online. They wanted to keep that relationship going. And at least we had the ability. They had worked together all year. That's the other reason I just feel bad, no matter what happens, for our current incoming kids, because they're not going to have that regular first experience of kind of meeting a staff, doing the meet and greet, and getting caught up and making those interpersonal connections, which I really do think set the year off well. So that's a concern for me. But I think, you know, it has to be more structured. And again, this is going to be a regular year. We're just having to shift our mindset to having it be more of a digitized, you know, virtual learning experience for the time being. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main
Elaborate.
differences are, you know, set schedule, right? Not Google Meets going on top of each other. All students having, you know, the technology that they need, not just sharing what you have available in your home. The learning standards are going to be taught and moved forward. You're also going to have required attendance, right? It was a little difficult to find some of our families, let's face it. And then our grading practices will go back to our normal grading and our assessment practices. So it's not going to just be, here's a list of some activities that you can try, see how you're doing. You may or may not have to complete everything, right, based on how your situation was at home. And then making sure that we provide even our services, because special ed services were difficult to do in the spring. So it's hard because I really do think that the whole thing really needs to be repackaged and remarketed, because when you hear remote learning, you think, oh, what just happened last spring? It really is actually distance learning, which are two completely different components. The difficult part, obviously, is teaching everybody all at once to try and make that shift. I will tell you, you have to have a lot of faith in your teaching staff, because a lot of people have already started to do this work. Even through Google, they're offering, starts tomorrow, all their new technologies that they've come out with, because they know that everybody needs to up the ante at this point. So there's a lot of online webinars that they're doing. They're doing 2 days, like it's called School Anywhere. It's tomorrow and Thursday. It's almost like a conference where you
Yes,
can go and
yes.
listen to it. So I'm signed up for it. A lot of people signed up for it. And then even just teaching each other, and that's going to be the focus of our PD, let's face it, right? Beyond the elementary teachers have new programs, so I'm sure, you know, they're a little concerned at this point. But, you know, having these different ways of doing it and knowing that we're all going to sit here and try and support each other. So I think that's the difference. Having a hybrid model, it's the ability to also have eyes on students. You need to see students at some point. That's how you can find out what's going on with them. You can read people. I mean, that's why we all decided to come back here, right? It's easier to read each other when you can physically see them. And then they just having that social contact. I know it's not going to be the same socialization that we're used to, but just knowing that there's other people out there is a whole different ballgame. So you're going to just see us taking our typical model and trying to revamp it to be hybrid / remote / sometimes remote, sometimes hybrid, whatever we is. But it's going to be shifting sands, and it's going to be fluid, but we always make it through something.
Jeff, any other questions?
Go ahead.
Sorry, wait.
I think-
Jet?
Go ahead,
I'm
John,
quick,
it's
I'm
okay.
just quick. So, I want to go back to Lions Pride for a second and ComEd. Just remind me who, I know we don't run them, who's in charge of those programs?
Well, no, CHIPS we do run.
Chips? No, I didn't say Chips. Lions Pride
In Lions Den.
and, yeah,
Lions, it's ComEd,
It's community ed
yeah.
office. But they're still technically Chelmsford Public Schools.
yeah.
They are, but they're kind of different.
Yeah,
I mean,
Well, it's
so-
like a subsidiary almost,
Yeah.
I guess.
No, I get it.
They're not
right,
required.
right. Okay, I just want to make sure we're getting information out to those people too.
Oh,
That-
yes, no, we will.
Okay, there just hasn't been a lot yet. And the second thing was, one of a parent had an idea, if we went all remote, would there be an opportunity for the kids to meet the teachers outside of the school, like, not in the building itself? Because I think meeting your teacher is pretty important, and I think a lot of parents do. Is it something that could be worked out?
I dovetailed this.
You may dovetail.
Thank
See, I didn't use it first.
I think that one of the concerns that I do have about, this either or is that I think there has to be some flexibility, and I think we have to be a little bit more creative about, these models. I think that, for example, maybe we do in that 10 days, or even, because, September and October, the weather's still pretty good, that some of the kids have the opportunity to come to the school and maybe meet on the school property in the field, appropriately socially distanced outside, as I said, so that they can, get to know their teacher. I'd say put a face with a name, but with the mask on, I think it's gonna be really, really hard for, everybody to try and, get to know each other in the ways that we've typically done it in the past. I'll go back to the last, meeting that we had too, is I even think a phased-in approach is not a bad idea. And I understand what you're saying about the optics, sending the elementary school kids back, but a phased-in approach and a hybrid model means that we've agreed that it's safe enough because of the metrics that you talked about to be able to send kids back. This is just a chance to be able to roll things out a little bit more smoothly. And yes, you don't want the elementary school kids to be the guinea pigs, but in a hybrid model, we're sending everybody back, so everybody's a guinea pig. So, I think that we have kind of missed the boat in some ways on exploring ways to, as I said, be creative, think outside the box, be innovative in some ways, in which we could actually be doing a little bit of both of these things. So I'm sending it back to you.
No, that was perfect.
Jeff, did you have a question? Could we kind of skip you? Okay.
Okay.
Maria?
So, I've now had a few questions, so I'll ask this. I had asked about, face shields and so on, and we talked about masks and maybe making it a requirement for everybody. And if somebody isn't going to wear it, then they're out, and into remote. So parents of, children with special ed are concerned that if they have sensory issues or so on, and
Right.
they remove a mask, are they automatically out?
Well, no,
So,
there are
I'm sure
special
there'll be rules.
populations that are exempt from those rules.
yeah.
No, so those, we wouldn't just be
Okay.
willy-nilly kicking kids out.
Okay, and now I'd like to, if I can, to speak to some, what Donna was talking about just for a minute here. We've talked a lot about a lot of things, and it's gonna come to a point where hopefully we have no more questions, but we might have many more. And there are parents out there whose question we probably still didn't get to. So I think whatever we choose tonight and whatever vote goes down, I think it's extremely important that definitely the sessions happen for parents and for the students, both, to be aware of whatever model we choose. I would like to see, if it's possible, if we go with a hybrid model, thinking about rolling it out at different times for different levels. And I think that's a recommendation that's being made by folks who are experts in the field. So just a thought about that, what she's saying and thinking out of the box is very important, but I can also see that we can't make too many extra things out of the rules, because then there's the ability to break and not have safety. So right now, I'm also getting a lot of comments from parents saying that the survey went out, people voted, this is what I would like to see, would like to happen. But if we vote to go hybrid, my sense is, and from comments that people are making, that although they personally may not want their students to be back in a physical classroom because they're very concerned about safety, the pressure is on to return the student to the classroom, especially at the levels of high school and middle school, where these kids really truly, and probably also at the elementary, really truly sense that they're missing something if they don't get to meet their teachers and everybody else in person. So I think sometimes the sense that I get, and believe me, I understand this because I'm a parent myself, that it would be just so much easier to say we're all remote for a parent because we're worried and we're concerned. But I personally, and I will say this for myself, I believe that my role here is to try to provide the best education that we can for the students of our district, and that if an option exists and it can be safely done, that I believe leads to that better education, then I feel the need to vote for it, even if, for me personally, I think that the 100% safety is in just keeping the kids with me. Okay, so I'm gonna say that outright because it is very difficult for parents out there today. And I'm with them. And for the teachers too. It's not that easy either. So, okay, thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions? Let's clear out any questions, and then we can, if anybody wants to make final statements about, what they're.
You want an additional one from me? Was that it?
Okay, I'll go back around. Donna, do you have any more questions you have?
No questions.
Jeff, no. John, no. Maria, question?
No, I don't have any more.
So everybody's good question. So if we want to go around and if you want to express your thoughts and opinions on this particular choice,
Sure.
you can do that.
So, a couple things. I mean, I don't even really know where to begin. I mean, it's so difficult sitting here as a teacher, as a parent, as a community member, to figure out how to process all of the information that has been really not collaborative from the state level, sometimes hypocritical, and very confusing at best. People have said, don't make an emotional statement. After 32 years of teaching, after 2 kids going through the system, after being involved in the schools for so many hours and visiting schools, I don't think that I am making an emotional decision. I absolutely 100% value seeing my students in front of me. It's the best day of the year, first day of school, okay? But then there's the reality of what we actually have to do in the classroom. And that's where I am concerned for the kids and for the teachers. Because it is gonna get hot, okay? And we don't have, and I know that seemed like an in-the-weeds kind of question, okay? But when you're a teacher in that hot classroom, it's really hard to figure out how to keep your students engaged. There's a reality of working with kids that just want to play with their masks all day long. Of standing 6 feet away from a kid. Elementary kids, they want to be around you all the time. You know, I don't even know as a teacher what it's going to feel like for me at the high school when I've got to talk to a kid about a very serious subject, okay? Being removed from their home or, some type of discipline issue that we're trying to process, and I've got to do it from 6 feet away. I guess that's the emotional piece, but it's also the real piece for what we're going to have to deal with in the classroom. And I don't think that people can completely appreciate how difficult this is going to be and all the realities that we haven't had a chance to talk about tonight, because there are some that are going to be known and there are going to be some that aren't. And that's the part that is so concerning for me. I just have one other thing I want to say. I really want to applaud all of us, okay, because I think that we have worked incredibly hard this summer. It's not just been a few meetings, it's been all summer, doing research, reading reports, talking to other districts, the whole thing. We've approached this very thoughtfully and very compassionately. And I think that whether we agree or not, okay, I don't think anyone can doubt our commitment to trying to do the best thing that we could for the kids of this district and the staff as well. I'd like to say thank you to all the parents too. I think that they've had incredibly thoughtful questions, and I appreciate their advocacy on behalf of their kids. It is an impossible situation. Some people said, you know, I know that you didn't sign up for this. Well, yeah, we did. Because you know what, being on the school committee wasn't always going to be easy. And the last couple of months, it's really not been easy. So, but thank you to everyone here at this table tonight and your staff and parents who volunteered throughout the summer to truly try and bring together the best possible plan that we could.
Jeff?
In my 40-plus years of education, this has been the most difficult decision I've had to make. I'm sure I speak for all of us. We've lost sleep. We've read every email that's come in. But I guess Dr. Fauci said the other day, this is going to be with us. And we've had, you know, and the bottom line is we're under 2% when? I'll tell you, I taught for 19 years. I was a dean. I've taught. Donna's right. Meeting your students, making that connection, that's just so important. When I went through school back in the old days, they told you not to smile until Thanksgiving. First 30 seconds of the class, I had lost that. And I think we should try it. We should try the hybrid. But the other thing is, if we are a school community, then everyone has to be involved in making it work. We can't say things are political or anything else. The bottom line is, if we really are a family, if we really are a community, we have to look out for each other. There's a societal responsibility. And for this to work, if you're going to send your child, if we go hybrid, and you're going to send your child, you as a parent and a guardian, and this may not be popular to say, you have a responsibility to make sure you and your child are safe, because there are teachers involved, there are staff involved, there are other people involved. We owe that to one another. And people will say you couldn't run a high school graduation. Well, I don't think that's an end point. I think that's a lesson for us. And I think it's a lesson, and maybe I'm Pollyanna-ish, but I think we can do better. I know we can do better. And I don't think that's an end point. I think that's a lesson for us. That there were people who lost out because some people didn't believe in their societal responsibility. And I think more and more we, as a public school committee, community, as a family, I think we can make it work. But in order to make it work, we all have to not only buy in, but we have to be responsible. You know, and I know whatever decision we make, it's not going to be popular. And I know whatever decision we make, people are going to be disappointed. But as Donna said, we're not making this, anyone here of the five of us, making this on a whim. There's been a lot of soul searching. There's been a lot of thought about it. And I want, you know, the community to know that we are doing what we believe, whatever your individual feelings are, is best for our students, for our teachers, for our staff. That's it.
John?
So I'm not a teacher, but I'm a parent, as Marie is, and I have 2 kids in the school. So, and I'm sure people at home know this, and parents at home know this, but all of these decisions that we make affect us too, right? So my daughter told me she wants to go back to school today. She said it today, and she said, but I don't want to give or get COVID from or to somebody. So she was scared. She told me, you know, I'm just scared to go back to school. My son doesn't necessarily want to go back to school, but that is a story for another day. And here's where I stand. Since our last meeting, I think last week, I said 157,000 people across the U.S. have died from COVID. Since then, it's probably almost another 10,000 people. And the infection rates are lower in Massachusetts. But again, to Jeff's point, as a community, from the things that I've seen and the emails I've received, it's hard to have confidence that we're all going to take those civic responsibilities and that responsibility we have to the other residents of this town. And there's going to be potential for an outbreak in our schools, right? And how do we handle that? And throughout all these meetings, for all the hard work everybody does, Linda does, Jay, Joanna, everybody across the town, the school committee people, the teachers, the union, all this work. And there was a whole lot of I don't knows and maybes, and we'll find out. And just based on that, I just think for me, we own these votes. And I've said this to people face to face and online. And if we make a decision to open hybrid and it goes well, everybody's going to be like, oh, you're a hero. But if we open hybrid and it's a disaster, I mean, those are lives we're talking about. And I'm not just talking about people that pass away from COVID. There are people that get sick from COVID and have all kinds of ailments and disabilities and heart problems. And there is just a lot we don't know about what we have to do. And there's a lot we don't know about the disease and how to control it. And I'm just going to repeat what I've always said. I don't believe that the appropriate venue for testing reopening is a school. I think there's got to be a better way. And we're not getting the support from the federal government, and the state is just in a bind. They're out of money, and it's all on us as a community to do it. And that's my stance. That's where I am. I don't want to vote for something that is going to hurt a whole lot of residents and potentially spark an outbreak again.
Maria?
Well, I've already said some of the things that are important to me. First of all, I think the participation of parents has been immense. The input has been tremendous. I've read every single one of the emails that was addressed to me. I've read the messages that were sent, everything. So, and I appreciate that, and thank them for sharing it. I also thank everybody here, because I know everybody has worked extremely hard, and that everybody wants to give it their best and wants to do the best for everybody. I want to be able to vote the way that is the safest and that is the best education. I think after tonight's discussion, I now think and hear from what the administration that in both models, you're going to give it the best shot, and you would work with staff to give it the best shot so that it's the highest quality possible. Although I think it's very difficult to run two models at a very high level for each model. And that is that if we, because the percentage is high on the number of people who want to go hybrid, that if we decide to go hybrid, there will possibly be more people that would go hybrid than would go remote for sure. And then one of the models may suffer more than the other. So it is going to be difficult, and we have to run remote. So I'm thinking this through because that is my highest level. I have two students personally. They react very differently to distance learning. One adapts extremely well and the other not as well, but works extremely hard to make it well, which I've appreciated in her. So I'm going to address this to the students. I think that this has created and is an opportunity for great resilience and for being able to learn in a different way, a lot more independent learning and learning those methodologies of independent learning. It works better at some levels than other. So if we adopt the hybrid model, I would like to see this group consider rolling it out at different times for different groups.
Thank you. All right, I'd like to thank you all too. I mean, this has been a ton of work. I texted Donna early and I thought my eyes were going to start to bleed from reading all the documents and everything else, but we do very much appreciate all the public input. From my perspective, the hybrid model provides not only the best educational plan, but the most flexibility. If you choose to go the hybrid model, it's there. If you don't want to go to the hybrid model, you have that option. If we go remote, there is no option, you know, and so those who say, well, we might be able to go hybrid some other time. Right now, we are at 1.8% positive test rate in Massachusetts, down from the 2.2 2 weeks ago when Governor Baker said, hey, knock it off. And guess what we did? We knocked it off, okay? And the rate is back down where it was at the beginning of July. You know, the recommended levels, 5%, 10%, whatever number you want to use, we're well below those at this point. You know, so that's where we are right now. What would change, do you think, that would allow us to go to the hybrid later on? We're not probably going to go below 1.8%. So what kind of rationale could you say? Oh, it wasn't safe in August, but now it's safe, even though the rate is the same or it's a little bit higher. You know, Governor Baker, I know, kind of tightened up the restrictions the other day on us, and in that same speech, he also said that, you know, some form of in-person learning is still the best for students. And I'll quote, facts or data don't support making schools remote across the board, okay? That's our governor, who is very cautious and, you know, and is doing his best. Even he, in the speech where he was telling people that we're going to have to roll things back, is saying, you know, in-person learning is what's best for our students. You know, safety-wise, this isn't our first go around in terms of dealing with school safety. I know in recent years we've dealt with making our schools more safe from outside intruders, and the administration has done you know, huge work in terms of, you know, increasing security, increasing cameras, increasing school resource officers, introducing ALICE protocols. They did an unbelievable job at making sure our students were safe from people from the outside. I think they're going to put in that same effort to make sure our students are safe when they're inside the buildings as well. You know, and I'm not saying a school intruder and a virus are the same thing and dealt with in the same way, but I really do trust our staff that they will make the buildings as safe as possible. You know, my last point is this, and again, I know Donna and Jeff said the same. I've been teaching for 32 years as well. I can't imagine trying to start the year without a group of students I've never met before. When things went bad in the spring, you know, I already knew 2/3 of my students. I remember one student in particular. I have, you know, fairly good students, and this student was a hard worker. You know, always passed his work in. After a couple weeks, I saw he wasn't. He wasn't passing his work in, and he wasn't logging into the class as much. And I knew that wasn't him, right? And I went in and I contacted his guidance counselor, say, hey, listen, so-and-so really isn't doing. If we started the year and that was that student, I would have no idea. And I would just think, he's not a very good student. Okay, I would have no idea what that student was like if I hadn't met him and had some time with him, you know, and whether our time with the students are a couple weeks, a couple months, it's still time with the students. The other thing about, you know, in the spring, is we didn't have the same sort of restrictions public schools did. We went back full bore, synchronous learning, regular curriculum, test, quizzes, the whole 9 yards, grades, the whole 9 yards, what we're talking about doing. And I could tell you a couple things about that. One is, it was really, really, really hard, okay, for the teachers and for the students. And again, I have very high achieving students. By the end, they were done. They were done going on the computer every single day, and that's their only experience. They were done at the time. The other thing is it was very lonely, right? Whether I was in my classroom by myself teaching, you know, on Zoom, or I was home at my desk, it was very lonely as a teacher, and I'm sure it's very lonely as students. You know, when I had a couple minutes to begin a class to talk to students, you know, 9 times out of 10, what they say is, I really miss seeing my friends. I really miss being in the building. I really miss that social interaction, okay? If we go fully remote, they're still going to miss that. They're not going to have those opportunities. Again, we have flexibility and hybrid option that we don't have if we go remote, okay? If you don't feel it's safe, if you don't feel comfortable sending your child to school in the hybrid model, you have the option of keeping them in the remote learning. If we go remote, we go remote. And the likelihood that we'll come out of remote, I don't see it happening. So that's my 2 cents. All right, so having said that, Donna, I'll let you make the motion however you want to make it.
I think we should do 2 separate motions. One would be to vote for hybrid, and the other would be to vote for
Sure.
remote. I don't know if that would be,
Can I,
Sure.
just a friendly,
Yeah.
just a friendly suggestion?
yes.
Similar to like an appointment of like a chair or vice chair, or whatever, you could just do a voice vote. and just go around the room and basically just state your preference. So you could make a motion to basically have there be a roll call vote of the preferred model, either hybrid or in person. And that way you wouldn't have to do a double motion.
Thank you. I recommend that the school committee
Take a roll call vote.
take a roll call vote, okay, with each member stating their preference for the hybrid model or the remote model
For the start of the school year.
for the start of the school year.
Second.
Second. Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any questions before we proceed? All right. Donna? I'm sorry, you have a question first.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah, personally.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Donna.
Okay.
So on this motion, we are not stating when this is gonna roll out, and we are also not stating, if it's gonna be all the groups rolling out. Is that correct?
We're
just choosing a model.
choosing a model.
Yeah,
Okay.
and to be honest with you, if you might take a friendly amendment to your motion, the other thing is your action tonight is still pending negotiations. So maybe it's that motion pending negotiations, because I still do think over the course of the next, week or so, as we're negotiating with the union around this return, some of these different issues can get flushed out. We also want to get their perspective and their opinion on things. So maybe if you just added, obviously, it's something that we want to implement for the start of the school year, but pending negotiations with the unions. And then we have executive session after, and we can continue to meet as well as this all gets flushed out.
I accept your friendly amendment.
Do I just second that?
Sure, second it.
Second.
All right. So any other questions before we vote? Okay. Donna, your choice.
Remote.
Jeff,
Hybrid.
John,
Remote.
Maria,
Hybrid.
hybrid. So 3-2 for the hybrid model. Okay, thank you all. That was great. So I assume we're going to roll information out to parents and that ASAP and.
Yeah, I would, we'll adjourn to go into executive session. And then, yes, we'll work on refining documents and communication plan for families as early as next week, end of this week, as early as next week.
Can I just bring one thing up? Somebody had actually asked, remember I asked about people volunteering their bus seats? Now this has become relevant. A parent did ask if we could find a way to make it easier for people to just, what's the easiest way, get it out to people?
We can send a separate communication out on
Yeah,
that front.
thank you.
We actually have had a number of people who have just said, I'm willing to forego mine.
Okay.
And they've emailed me, I forwarded them on to Peter, Joanna. So a simple email to any of us can do
Okay.
that. But if you email the transportation coordinator directly, he can just pull you out of the system.
Okay.
So that's kind of the quickest way to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, in terms of public comment, I mean, we've had running public comment very much for the meeting, so I think we don't, unless anybody has anything specific that that somebody sent them that they want to read into the record. Okay,
This
all right. Just also keep in mind, we are meeting again next Tuesday, so if people do have some comments to make, we will be here again, and you will be able to log in live if you wish, or you'll be able to email each of us as well. Okay, so no public comment, not on here, but new items, just John wanted to mention real quick.
For next week, I would like to have a discussion and a vote on adopting the MASC mask policy that was put out.
So I think that's a good
It's a
idea.
pretty good
So We'll
policy.
bring that in the other policy.
The other policies
Yeah,
too?
yeah, so, okay, anything else on the new items? Okay, I will take a motion to adjourn for executive session.
I recommend that the school committee adjourn to executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation, and not to return to public session.
Second.
Second, okay, Donna,
Aye.
Jeff,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Maria?
Aye.
Aye, okay, 5-0. All right, let's take a little bit of a break.
Yeah.